I think we're ready to begin our meeting. So thank you everybody for coming here today. I'll call the meeting to order. Time is 7:03 on Monday, January 25th. Just want to start by acknowledging that the lands on which we gather is the traditional territories of the Coast and Straits Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Songhees in the Esquimalt Nations, and that their historic connections to these lands continue to this day. Item number 2.1 on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Is there any discussion or changes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
Yes, in favor.
Thank you. That passes. We just now have adoption of the council meeting minutes and report of public hearing. So first we have the regular council meetings of January 11th.
Move adoption.
Move adoption. Thank you. Seconded. Is there any corrections or changes? Councillor Ney? Can you just put your microphone on when you speak as well?
Is that the 11th one?
Correct. This is for January the 11th.
Yeah, on page 4, it's just a typo. My last name's spelled incorrectly at the very bottom of the page, or on page 2.
I will trust that you're correct, and we will.
It's spelled N-A-Y. Yeah, it's just
Oh.
a typo.
Just a typo. Okay. There was another one of those later on as well. It was caught.
there
So thank you for that correction. Anything else on these minutes? I'm not hearing anything from our remote attendants either, so I will call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Green
Sorry, yes.
and Councillor Zelka?
Yes, in favor.
Thank you. That passes. Then we have the report of the public hearing. This is to be adopted. Oh, Councillor Nick, can you just turn off your microphone? We can only have one on at a time in here.
Move adoption.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Is there any, the one typo that there's a K instead of an H was caught. So is there any other corrections or changes? I'm not seeing any. So the motion to adopt is live. All those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
In favor, thank you.
Thank you. That passes. We now move to item number 4.1, Committee of the Whole minutes, and we can do both the 17th and 14th together, that they be received.
Move receipt.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
Yes, in favor.
Thank you. And now we have a rise and report from the closed council meeting. This is for those watching at home or following us over years, this is new under a new procedures bylaw that we have a standing position on our agendas to rise and report on a regular basis. What I need to do though, just from a best practices perspective, is just have someone read these out for the record. These are not being voted on today, but they are just being read verbally into the record. So if I could have a councillor, probably in the room here, read those items into the agenda.
Okay, item 4.1, that the memorandum from the Director of Parks, Recreation and Culture regarding a Wall of Fame announcement and recognition for Mrs. Margaret Lidke be received, and that staff move forward with an announcement of the Wall of Fame recognition of Miss Margaret Lidke, and once the district can hold an in-person celebration, a more formal and public recognition be given.
Just reading it is all we need. So if you could also read 5.2.
Okay, and so from the closed meeting on December 14th, that the appointment of Deborah Hopkins as Director of Corporate Services, Corporate Officer be rescinded, and that the appointment of Anya Nervo as Interim Deputy Corporate Officer be rescinded, and further that the appointment of Joanna Winter as Corporate Services Advisor / Interim Duty Director of Corporate Services be rescinded.
Thank you very much. So that now is on the record, and very much appreciate this change in process so that we're very clear about what happens and these things move out of in camera. As you can see, a lot of that is procedural pieces, but it's still important for it to be formally follow that path. We're on to item number 6 here on Mayor's remarks. I don't have a lot to say today, but you may recognize if you're watching from home that we are all wearing masks through the course of this meeting. This follows some of the guidelines given by Dr. Bonnie Henry and some of the public health announcements made today, and just recognizing that we have some limitations in this room of airflow and sort of an abundance of caution. So you'll see us wearing these masks throughout this meeting for the time being. I also want to just point out, if you'll notice now in the Oak Bay News on the 3rd page at the bottom, Oak Bay District has taken out a standard space, and you'll see there a place that you will see announcements, upcoming events, meeting schedules, new information. There was one this week on the new-ish Oak Bay Civic Web portal, which provides all access to both the minutes, the agendas, and the live stream and the historical video, as well as all the reports. So it's a very important piece of our community outreach, and those sorts of information will be posted there. Again, as a way of sort of sharing information with the public going forward. So please check that out on a weekly basis. And last but not least, we are starting the health and safety renovations that are going to be happening in much of the hall over the coming months. Those are starting at the beginning of February, so the drive-through and the parking lot will largely be closed throughout that entire period as we fill it up with ATCO trailers so that the staff can continue their work during the duration of the renovations going on. So just be aware of that. And that concludes my remarks for today. Up next, item 7.1, we have electric vehicle charging stations. I don't believe we intend to have a staff speak to it, but certainly are available for information. I would just like to point out, too, we'll probably change some of the wording on these on the agendas to make it more clear. You'll note that this is not subject to public input. I will not be calling on the public to call in on this one because this was dealt with public input at an earlier meeting at the Committee of the Whole. There are a number of items, however, on the later agenda, so where we do welcome public participation, and that information, if you want to prep your dialing fingers, is available on the beginning of the agenda package. And of course, you should be visible on your live stream view as well. So there we go, 7.1. Does staff want to make any overview of this, or are we sufficient to take questions from council?
We'll await questions from council, Your Worship.
Okay. So we'll take questions, or we can have or it's just as simple to make a motion as well.
I'll make the motion of the recommendation from that's on the agenda.
It's moved and seconded.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Again, dealt with quite thoroughly at the Committee of the Whole level, where we made this recommendation. Go ahead,
A
Councillor
question
Zelka.
from Councillor Zelka.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. In the report on the EV stations options analysis available through the website, it talks about how some of the manufacturers of stations were shortlisted and some weren't. This motion doesn't specify which particular one we're going with. Has the decision been made as to which one of the shortlisted manufacturers we're going with yet, please?
Yeah, that motion that was included in the. You're right. The motion doesn't specifically state that, but it was included in the report at the Committee of the Whole, and I don't have it open in front of me at the moment. Ms. Rella, do you have that handy?
It's more a question of curiosity.
Mr. Rennick is on the line, Your Worship.
Okay, so I might invite Mr. Rennick, who's our manager of engineering, just to remind us the successful supplier of those charging stations.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, to Council, the report did recommend a specific supplier, which is ChargePoint. However, as the stations have not been procured yet, that has not formally gone through. So there was a recommendation, but a formal decision has not yet been made.
So this motion would constitute that formal decision, would it not, Mr. Rennick?
I'm sorry, could you please repeat that question?
Sorry, yes. Just to be clear, if council passes the motion as it sits here, that concludes the decision-making process, and they'll move forward with the charge point. Mr. Rennick? I think we lost Mr.
Through you, Mayor, to Council, I'm not actually sure that it does, because while the report does speak to the choice of network, the resolution itself does not specify a network.
So, so a good question being raised here. Is that something that we should modify this wording to include that, or would that come back at a later meeting for clarification? And I might go to our administrative staff rather than Mr. Rennick here, just for clarification of practice here.
Procurement will occur in alignment with the policy, Your Worship. So if we have direction to procure and to install at 2 additional locations that are yet to be determined and to charge the hourly rate, that is the recommendation staff is looking for at this time. If you want additional assurity as to who the provider would be, we could bring that information back. Otherwise, we'll take this as direction to procure.
Okay, I think that's clear enough, as we have the report indicates where that's going.
May I continue, Chair?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you very much. I do agree with the staff. It does indicate specifically that staff is to procure. I just wanted to, I'm glad I asked the question, because I would like staff to feel assured that we are giving them authorization to proceed, and whether it's one of the 2 shortlisted, it doesn't really matter to me as long as they proceed with the procurement.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Zelka. Is there any other questions or discussion on this?
Please don't yell at your mother.
We have someone in the background. Any other questions? I don't see any. So we have the motion on the table here. All those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
In favor, thank you.
Thank you. And item number 8 on the agenda, and this is subject to public input. So if anybody from the public wishes to call in, the number again is at the beginning of the agenda, as well as on the bottom of the live stream. I would suggest you call in now if you have any interest in this item. We have an annual Arts Alive program update with recommendations and a report. Is Mr. Meikle on the line for this, Ms. Varela, or are you giving the introduction?
Mr. Meikle is on the line, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you very much. So welcome, Mr. Meikle, who is our Manager of Recreation Services. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to check in, you can hear me okay?
We can very well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship, and through you, Mayor, to Council. Just a brief on this report. So the past practice has been that the Arts Laureate and the Public Arts Advisory Committee members have proceeded with a call for sponsorship from local businesses to support the annual Arts Alive sculpture program. As such, a letter was sent to businesses at the end of last year requesting sponsorship for the upcoming year's program. However, given the impact of the pandemic on local businesses and on Oak Bay Parks, Rec and Culture operations, which included a delay in the installations of last year's sculptures, as well as the impact of the transition in membership of the Public Arts Advisory Committee and the Arts Laureate, we're seeking some direction from Council on this.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there questions of Mr. Meikle from Council? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to staff. I'm a little bit confused about the language in the report. What was the call sent to the artists and for sponsorship basically independently of staff? Like, did staff sort of find out about that after the fact?
Mr. Meikle?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and through you, Mayor, to Council, yes, that is correct.
Is there any other questions, Councillor Appleton?
Yes, thank you. Just a little bit further. Thank you for that. In terms of alternative budget options, the report proposes returning some alternative budget options. Would that include not hosting at all for 2021, 2022? And following up on that, do we have the ability to run a program similar to the one that we ran for 2020, 2021 for the subsequent year? Would it be similar in structure and similar in implementation, or are we going to be further restricted? And is that part of what would be outlined in the report back?
Thank you, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, Mayor, to Council. That would certainly be a potential option outlined in the report. It would be could potentially be a similar program, although timing would certainly look different, given pandemic challenges and the delay in installing last year's sculptures. We're off on our what I guess you would call our normal annual timeline by a number of months at this point. So I think it would be up for discussion with the incoming Arts Laureate and incoming members of the Public Arts Advisory Committee as to how they may wish to proceed. I think options may include a similar program to past years, may include having to take a hiatus for 1 year, for example. Several options, and there is still the 2020, 2021 sculptures on display in the community, and we're looking to offer those artists a full year of display as originally agreed upon, although given the delay in installations, that would take us until August 2021.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I have Councillor Braithwaite and Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, to Mr. Meikle. Mr. Meikle, I know that there's a point in here that says, that speaks to the budget, the allocated budget for the 2021 Arts Alive program, and asking us to be able to give that back to staff to look for alternate options for that allocated budget. But speaking to the allocated budget for the 2020 budget, I'm assuming that that budget will stay in place to perhaps purchase one of the current pieces that are on the Arts Alive program, if that's something that council wishes to do.
Mr. Meikle, yeah, perhaps a little clarification on 2020 versus 2021 budget allocations, where we normally set aside around $20,000 for those purposes.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, Mayor, to Council. That is correct. That would be an option. Now, I think the clarification on this is that the purchase or the allocated budget. So, for example, in 2020, we came forward to purchase a sculpture from the 2019 program. And so just as probably a matter of semantics here and how you define that, but each year there is an allocated budget of 20,000. And so, yes, technically the 2020 allocation for the 2020 sculpture program would generally have been coming forward around this time of year with budget. But again, given the delays in the installations this year, we're a little bit behind on that schedule. So yes, it would still be available for an option for council to purchase a sculpture from the 2020 program.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Meikle. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite, to follow up.
Yeah, no, I was just ensuring that that money would still be in, that would just be a carryover to the 2021 budget. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, and thank you for that information, Councillor Braithwaite, finding that out. One other thing that I just wanted to ask about is that, through you, Mayor, to Mr. Meikle, there is substantial work to be done on Oak Bay Avenue for the removal of the remaining portions of the trees and repairs to the sidewalks and whatnot. I'm just wondering what options are available to the artists for protection of their artwork or removal of their artwork. How are we planning to handle that?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, Mayor, to Council. We have yet to delve into the specifics of planning that, but there certainly are a number of options available, and we're still in a place where we're not haven't heard back from all artists, or haven't actually gone out to confirm that all artists will be leaving their sculptures in place for that extended period. Some of them potentially will have commitments to move that sculpture to other locations. They do tend to do that if a sculpture isn't sold in one location, that they will move to a new city for display. So we haven't delved too far into that yet, but would need to do that in the near future.
Thank you. Is there questions from Councillor Green or Councillor Zelka?
Yes, I have a question, please, Mayor.
No questions.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Through you to Mr. Meikle, Mr. Meikle, on the, back to Councillor Appleton's point, on the fact that letters went out in December to small business owners requesting honorariums again or requesting funding, what is the oversight from your perspective required for that process, or is there any oversight on that process? And I only ask the question because for me, I'm the BIA liaison as well as Tourism Committee liaison, and I was concerned that the letters had gone out but that staff weren't aware of it ahead of time. So I'm just wondering, is there an oversight mechanism that could be implemented to ensure that businesses aren't canvassed without the knowledge of the municipality, and that would be your staff?
Thank you, Councillor Green. Sorry, I wasn't sure if that was the end of the sentence, so I hesitated. Mr. Meikle, could you answer that question?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and through you, Mayor, to Council. Generally, in the past, it would have gone through the Public Arts Advisory Committee, of which was staff liaisons there, and Councillor Braithwaite as liaison as well. And so in the past, I think there was, shall we say, a little more flexibility to do that with that knowledge. Now, with the new, I guess you could say, terms of reference for committees and terms of reference for the Public Arts Advisory Committee coming into play in the near future here, that process is much more clearly outlined for the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meikle. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Meikle. Are there any other questions? I didn't hear anything from Councillor Zelka. So before I go to an motion, I'm just going to invite the public, if anybody from the public has called in. Ms. Williams, has anybody called in to speak to this item on the agenda?
Nobody at this time, Your Worship.
Okay, so I'll bring it back here. We can go to motion, and then we can discuss the motion.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
All of
This is
the,
all
all
of them?
lines? Okay,
Yes.
moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on these items? I don't see any. I just want to, lest there be any concern about the letters going out to the rescinding piece, I just want to extend my appreciation to the Arts Laureate, who I know was trying to leave her position, which ended on December 31st, in good shape, and for the next Arts Laureate coming in to make sure there was no sort of outstanding chores to be taken up the day of. And so I don't want to say this as a negative at all. It was everything done with the best of intentions, but it being, and would have normally been the normal practice, but of course being an unusual year, falls outside of the normal practice. So I don't want to leave the impression here that anything untoward or mistaken was done there. So with that, ready to call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes?
Councillor Zelka?
In favor, thank you.
Thank you very much. And my apologies, I went to 8.2. I was working off my old agenda item here, and in the refreshed agenda, there was actually a refreshed 8.1 for the City of Victoria Jubilee Cycling Route. This was the item that was at our Committee of the Whole for discussion at there, and from that came a motion that's listed here. So because it's Committee of the Whole and not Council, it's here for us to finalize that, and then a letter will be sent off to the city tonight or tomorrow. So if I don't think we need to read it out, but perhaps if Councillor Appleton, you made this motion at the meeting, if you wish to just cite the motion again.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I would move that the motion prepared at the January the 18th, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting be forwarded to the City of Victoria.
Thank you very much, and moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion on this item? Councillor Green or Zelka?
I have a
That's fine,
question,
thank you.
Councillor Zelka.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. Sorry, was the motion what was written in the minutes, or was it a different motion? Please clarify.
Yeah, so the motion that's here is the one that we're making here, that staff prepare a response indicating that Leighton Road, et cetera, and there is a full letter will be written, with these points being made to the City of Victoria.
So just to clarify with you, Chair, the motion is as written in the agenda of today's meeting.
That's correct.
Thank you. I wish to make an amendment to the motion.
You may do so.
Thank you. Whereas Robert's Rules of Order allows decisions to be reconsidered before action, I wish to move the following amendment to be appended to the end of the motion. And further, that Oak Bay Council request City of Victoria to reconsider their decision to close Oak Bay access to Richmond Road at Foul Bay, and
Sorry.
to take into account formal input from Oak Bay Council.
For clarification, you meant to say Richardson, not Richmond, is that correct?
Oh, excuse me, Richardson. Yes, thank you. Yes, Richardson.
So the amendment is to add that to the bottom of this. Could you just read the entire amendment again aloud?
Yes, out loud. And further, since this is a letter from one council to the other, and further, that Oak Bay Council request City of Victoria to reconsider their decision to close Oak Bay access to Richardson Road at Foul Bay, thank you, and to take into account formal input from Oak Bay Council.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Zelka. Is there a seconder for that motion? I'm not seeing a seconder. I'm just going to ask Councillor Green just to make sure I don't give away any chances here. Councillor Green, you can just stay silent if you don't want to second it, but I'm not hearing anything at the moment. I'm giving ample time here, Councillor Zelka, to see if there's a seconder to speak to the motion. And I understand where it's coming from. I'm not seeing any here, so that does not. We won't. That just fails for lack of a seconder. So we're back to the main motion. Is there any other questions or discussion on the motion? I recognize as well if anybody from the public wishes to call in, they have the opportunity to do so. So that number is posted on the agenda and at the bottom of the live streaming screen. So I won't go to the question just yet, but we have the motion live on the table for discussion. Are there any other comments or discussion on this item? I'm not seeing any. Ms. Williams, is there any members of the public that have?
Nobody wishing to speak, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you very much. In that case, we have the motion live on the table. I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
In favor.
Thank you. And yeah, we'll leave that. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number now 8.3 on the agenda, which is the gas-powered landscaping equipment. We have a staff report here, and is Mr. Hyde-Lee the member of, so our manager of parks, is online and here to introduce the item to the agenda.
Thank you, Your Worship. Quick sound check. Can you hear me?
We can hear you clearly. Thank you very much.
That's great. Just a quick summary. Just at the November 9th, 2020 council meeting, council directed staff to report on the options and impacts related to the reduction or the elimination of gas-powered landscape equipment in municipal operations, and certainly for residential and commercial operators. And this report outlines those options for council to reconsider. It comes with two recommendations at the top of the page. One is to look at things in a more broad spectrum to reduce energy consumption over a 5-year period, including a review of our landscape and maintenance standards. One thing that it is continually ongoing, maybe a little bit more so since we've been looking into this electric equipment, and that staff should return to council with a report if we anticipate any additional financial resources or service level adjustments to what we do as far as parks maintenance goes. So the report is relatively self-explanatory. I hope it points us in a direction, and certainly I'm here for any questions or discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hyde-Lee, and appreciate the report coming back to council in a timely fashion. We have the piece here, but before we get to a motion, I'll take questions and then I'll go to the public if anybody from the public wishes to address us, and then we'll come back to motions. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
So through you, Mayor, to staff. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Heidley, for the report and also for pending and pointing us in the direction of the procurement policy. And so I have a few questions, and they're actually sort of driven from what I'm reading in the procurement policy here. And so it's also kind of a nice opportunity to test out this policy because it's new to all of us. And so I have a number of questions that really are footholded in what I'm reading at 2.3 in the sustainable purchase practice, where it's encouraging the district, it's saying that the district will consider environmental, social, and economic value of goods and services, and that that the intent is to shift away from goods and services that negatively impact the environment and society, and work towards goods that are more environmentally sound and socially beneficial. And it also speaks to you know, supporting pilot testing of potential new goods and other support that encourages us to look at the triple bottom line, though it doesn't use that language, to reduce and look towards non-carbon alternatives. So a few questions. You still there? So that was just...
Yes, I'm
yeah,
still
okay,
here.
thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the first questions is, I'm just wondering how you went about determining the cost. So there's two aspects to this. One is your commentary related to the residential ban, and one to the corporate ban, right? So with regards to the corporate ban, you've assessed, the report says that I believe that it would cost $10,000 to implement, and there would be costs related to reduction of service as well as the capital costs, as I've understood it, labor costs and capital costs. So just with regards to that, I was just wondering, I mean, that's one piece of economic analysis, and I'm wondering if, because we're looking at a sustainable initiative here, whether other costs, well, first, the costs that would be offset from the fuel maintenance and other costs in gas-powered equipment versus electric, but also how you weigh up costs of both environmental and social value, because I don't really see that in this report. I wonder if you could just speak to that.
Sure.
Sure. So in regards to the you know, the social environmental values, I'll speak to that first. You know, as a Parks Department, I would say that we're increasingly aware of all of the new stringent regulations that are being introduced really globally around noise and pollution that is related to two-stroke gas-powered landscape equipment. And we receive quite a few calls every year from residents in Oak Bay that are requesting a quieter and more environmentally, what I'd call that kind of a sensitive approach to what could be referred to as green space management. So we certainly understand that utilizing electric equipment is going to clearly help us achieve this objective. So the two-stroke landscape equipment is a horrific polluter, mainly because the fuel is not mixed efficiently during the combustion process. So about 30% of the actual hydrocarbon is just spewed out into the atmosphere. So it's a really positive thing, not only for the health of the worker, but for the environment to begin to move in the direction of utilizing this electric equipment, landscape equipment that's becoming available. As far as a cost goes, the example that I gave in the report really reflects the most expensive option if council were to decide that we would move to only electric equipment immediately. And that example is for our fall leaf program, where we did do a trial run in 2014. And what we found was that the leaf blowers were just not powerful enough to be able to for us to be able to move large volumes of leaves, not only residential leaves, but leaves that arrive from residential properties along the Tax Boulevard out to the street to coincide with public works to be able to pick them up. So that example that I've given is the most expensive option. And the actual cost of the blower itself still is very expensive, and it's mainly the battery. There's an awful lot of pieces of equipment that we could move to very quickly that would suit our needs quite well. And those would be the two-stroke electric trimmers, some of the two-stroke weed eaters, smaller chainsaws. Where we get stuck a little bit with our labor costs and equipment costs is on the more expensive leaf blowers to move these large volumes of leaves, and for the larger chainsaws, which really aren't on the market yet. And that's where we get a little bit tied up. But, you know, we certainly understand that this is the way things are going. And as the pieces come on board, we're already researching what's there and can it offer us the same performance of what we're presently using. A lot of pieces can now. I hope that answers your question in not too long-winded a way.
No, that's very helpful. Can I follow up, Mr.
Of course,
Mayor?
go ahead, Councillor Day.
I will also mention one other thing environmentally. There's a lot of study now that's coming out of Europe in regards to not only the environmental pollution that leaf blowers cause, but well, just to expand on that, you know, the fingers are being pointed at the leaf blower with a lot of accuracy that they're the real culprit when you begin to take into consideration insect decline and just the damage to soil biology and plant health that is beginning to happen. Because when you blow something at 200 or 300 kilometers an hour, you begin to damage the soil, erode the topsoil, damage the roots of the plants. You can certainly spread weed seeds and all kinds of pathogens like the funguses that get into the tree, and all of the dust and debris from everything from just dirt to dog feces up into the air. So the leaf blower is, I would have to say, you know, does have good reason to have a few fingers pointed at it, but just with the development of the whole landscape trade, it's become a vital piece of equipment for so many contractors.
Thank you, Mr. Heidley. Go ahead, Councillor Nay.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for speaking to the environmental and the social noise costs of the leaf blower. One of the places you say in the report that there are some places in the municipality that the corporation could now use electric leaf blowers, but not all of them, and not to rely completely on them. I believe that's what was stated at one point. So I'm wondering, I mean, although it's not possible to do a complete conversion to electric, are there places where the corporation could use them now? And is the corporation, when opportunities come up for replacing the machines, the gas run machines, is the corporation now
equipment that we look to purchase aligns with the sustainable procurement policy, and certainly electric is the first piece that we begin to look at. And ask ourselves, can it do the job? We have trialed quite a few pieces already. We've had Still and Husqvarna reps here at the Parks Department. A lot of the employees have tried out various things. It is a little bit of a, I would say that the target customer, which is us or the actual people that use these pieces of equipment, it's a little bit in flux still. Like there's that psychological transition to say, yeah, these work really, really well. But we're right on that threshold right now. To give you an example of where we could use them, excluding our fall leaf program, we could use an electric blower for almost all our other applications.
Wow. So
Does that,
yeah.
does that
Well,
answer the question?
so is
Councillor
that
Wynn?
given that you could do that, will you do that, or is it happening?
Well, it really, this is where the cost comes in. To buy a less powerful blower than the current model that we use two models, a 500 and 600 series Still. So the latest electric blower that is out is less powerful than the 500, but still it would do an awful lot of the required work that we would need. It's just that it is about 4 times the cost. So in regards to our repair and supplies account, where we do have money there to be able to purchase maybe 2 or 3 pieces of equipment each year, it would just become 1. So it's this transitionary period that we really want to have a good look at and say, okay, let's hope the price comes down. Let's hope it can fit into our repair and supply budget and be able to purchase this equipment when it becomes available. And we say, yes, that's the piece we want. We already do have 2 handheld leaf blowers in operation here. I've had many conversations with the City of Victoria that are ahead of us in regards to their transition, in particularly with the arboricultural crew. There's a lot of pieces of equipment that they love. One of the operators said that he would never go back to using one of the small pruning saws. He would only ever use an electric saw now. They're far quieter. You almost don't have to wear headphones sometimes. So there's huge benefits here. It's just this transition in power and the battery life, etc. One of the beauties of all of the equipment that's been offered by the major manufacturers is once you buy a battery, the battery is interchangeable with all of the pieces of equipment that you buy. And then there's a considerable fuel savings right off the hop. There's almost no maintenance to these pieces of equipment. You use them, you put them away, you charge the batteries. Next day, you just get them. They're not down in the mechanic shop for carburetor adjustments, etc. So we expect the life of the machine to work for a long time. The only question is, what's the battery degradation?
Okay, thank you. I think this is probably a kind of, I'm going to ask you, Mr. Hidley, because this is the issue we're talking about, but it's probably a kind of decision-making process we're going to have to figure out how to contend with as we work towards non-carbon producing equipment throughout the community. But so the question is, how do we assess when it's time to make those changes? And the reason I'm asking that is because we know as technology evolves, in the early days, it's simply not as good as it is in time. I mean, we've seen that with electric cars. I bought an electric car that gives me 180K, but I bought it, it's a 10-year-old vehicle. And now vehicles get, 500-600K on it. But my car works fine still. It still functions, it serves my purposes still, so it's okay. So the question I have is, we've got some numbers we're working here with, and I'm just trying to understand the decision-making process that goes on here. Are we waiting for these numbers to balance out so that there will be no financial cost, or are we are we thinking kind of more holistically around social, environmental, and financial costs to the community when we consider when it's time to jump in with these, what we know are technologies that will be overtaken in 2 or 3 years, or maybe even 1 year. So I'm just wondering if you could help me understand how those decisions are made.
Thank you, Councillor Green. What we're hoping is that as the battery technology improves, the batteries will still be interchangeable with the pieces of equipment that we've purchased. And your reference to an electric car is a great example. So that's the best case scenario. So as the batteries improve with their longevity, that's the only piece that you begin to purchase. You don't repurchase the equipment. The equipment should have a very long shelf life, unlike a lot of our two-stroke equipment that we have right now, where some pieces we replace every couple of years because they just become finicky. In regards to the social side of things, I think that, you know, this is a piece that residents and throughout the Capital Regional District really need to hear about, because we're right on the verge of this transition, much like the electric car, where this equipment will become commonplace. And my personal feeling on it is that you may have a finger pointed at you if you're not using it. And there are companies that are beginning to advertise that they are environmentally sustainable by exclusively using electric equipment. So it's coming on board. But my concern from a parks operation point of view is we're there, but I just don't want to do it too quickly and you know, run into these operational challenges in regards to maintenance. By having some equipment that just isn't quite there yet, but it's going to be really soon, and I'm confident in that.
Thank you, Mr. Heidley. Just so you know, it's Councillor Ney that's asking the questions, not Councillor Green. Just to be so. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
I apologize, Councillor Ney.
That's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Heidley.
Sorry, and Ms. Rella wanted to just jump in as well. Ms. Rella.
Your Worship, I'm just wondering if Christopher Payne, Director of Financial Services, could provide an additional comment to that.
Sure, I'd appreciate that. And perhaps, Mr. Payne, if you could also just touch on would this be a scenario whereby we would go out to a tender to, say, be our supplier for the next X years and get a more comprehensive piece of this, or what would be the process we'd even look at? Go ahead.
Well, I'll just answer that after I touch on the governance piece a bit here, because what I believe, do correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Ney is asking is really where does the governance decision-making fit in here? And really what I would say is that staff is constrained by two governance considerations. The first is, of course, budget. Council decides appropriate funding levels, and with that comes service level expectations. So constrained by those two limiting factors, the operations departments, they deliver the services that's expected for the price that's expected. Now, council can relax one or both of those governance limitations in anticipation of other policy considerations, such as social and environmental considerations. So if council, said it's more important for us right now to reach other environmental goals, therefore additional funding will be added to achieve that, or we will accept a lower level of service because productivity will therefore drop immediately. Those are absolute governance decisions that council can make and staff would respond to in our best ability. To answer the mayor's questions in terms of long-term procurement, right now the equipment replacement that the manager of parks is referring to really happens normally under our procurement limitations that would require a formal competition. However, there are procurement arrangements that this district can reach for long-term replacement of equipment, which can obtain better value for money, if that's what the best way to deliver the services is determined to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Go ahead, Councillor Nay.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. So just a couple questions around the residential part, Mr. Hidley. There's a comment in the report that says that the impact on the economic impact for gardening companies would be substantial. And I'm just wondering how that assessment is made. I mean, obviously there's an initial outlay, but there are companies, as you've mentioned, right now that are gone exclusively to green technology gardening equipment. And I was just speaking one this morning as I was walking along Beach Drive called Island Green, and they're working down at GNS. And I'm told by them and the other one I know of, Clean Air, I don't know if I should be, but other company, that they have no more, they're going gangbusters in terms of their business plan, and they can't keep up to the demand. So, they're expanding their companies in both instances of these companies that I've spoken to. So when we talk about that this would create a hardship, I'm just wondering, what is the analysis that's being conducted here to make the, to make the claim that really that this would be nothing but a hardship, rather than I'm just thinking about, is there a way to look at this more sort of comprehensively about sort of the risks and the benefits to business, which it appears that is what exists.
Mr. Hidley, perhaps you can just touch on how, on the commercial impacts as you see them.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Nay. I reached out to quite a few landscape companies, and although you reference some that are extremely busy, and that's true, personally, I think that there's many landscape contractors that are beginning to move towards electric equipment because they know that it's a more sustainable, a customer-friendly way to do business. But what I tried to reference in the report was, if it were to happen, a decision was made that this transition happens very quickly. The majority of the companies haven't got to the point where they're beginning to move towards electric equipment. They're still in flux. They still have a lot of equipment that is two-stroke and gas-powered that works very well. So that's where the expense would come. And when you're looking at an immediate $10,000 expenditure for hedge trimmers, leaf blower, small chainsaw, etc., that's more than what they could absorb in a short period of time.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hidley. And I do appreciate the concern, for smaller businesses, because it is true. Nobody wants to see, them collapse because an initiative is too aggressive. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I'll just make one other comment, which I referenced in the report. So many of them actually work under set contract, and it's just something that you need that transitionary time to afford the equipment and renegotiate if it's going to take longer to do the same service with equipment that may take a bit longer.
Sorry. Okay, just another question. Then you said in the report that the average size lot in Oak Bay could meet, that their landscaping needs could be met with electric leaf blowers. Although, of course, it was qualified that the uplands may be a bit different because of the larger properties. So I'm just wondering, given that observation, that at this point in time, residential properties could use the electric leaf blower, but we're concerned about, you know, going too quickly for the commercial providers. In that instance, is there any value in considering a phased-in approach with the residential properties, given the pace at which technology is advancing right now?
Mr. Hadley?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Ney. Yes, and I'll use my property as an example. I would refer to it as a highly ornamental property. I could easily look after the yard for all of my hedge trimming, leaf blowing, tree pruning requirements with electric equipment right now. And in fact, my neighbor does.
Okay, thank you very much.
It's just this transitionary piece to begin to educate. That is,
Thank you.
we're just sitting in this, you know, limbo land right now with this equipment coming on, and just the need for more of an understanding in regards to its efficiencies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hadley. I just want to remind anybody who's watching this that if you wish to call in, we have one call already in queue. We'll get to your questions and comments in a few minutes here. We're just going to wrap up council questions at this point first, and then we'll go there. Are there any other questions of council for staff? Don't see any other hands up. So Councillor Green or Zelka, any questions? Just let you know, we can't hear you if you're speaking, but otherwise we'll move on.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Okay, so no questions at this table. So we'll go to the public. I know we had one person in queue, Dr. Teal Phelps Bondroff, is that correct? So we'll take that.
Yes.
So if that's, I understand you're on the line, so please introduce yourself and in your municipality of residence, and go ahead and speak to council.
Yeah, and just could you clarify how much time I have?
We don't have a formal limitation on public input at these things. We ask most people to try and keep it to around 3 minutes, if that's possible.
Perfect, thank you. Sorry, I'm Dr. Teal Phelps Bondroff. I live over in Salish, and yeah, we have a very strict 3-minute limit in Salish. I think I'll start with just addressing some of the responses that Mr. Hadley mentioned. One of the things I find most concerning with the report is a lot of the really excellent comments that Mr. Hadley just made are not in the report. And so I think there is a bit of a weakness in the content of the report because it doesn't mention environmental impacts and social impacts and explore the sort of full range of information that we just got from Mr. Hadley. In particular, a few things I wanted to highlight, and I was actually quite surprised to hear this, that the $10,000 number that's mentioned in the report comes from 2014. And then we have this sort of constant communication around, oh, batteries and the technology are 5 years away. That was 7 years ago. So, I mean, at this point, the technology is here. I've actually seen people who made a remote-controlled airplane that they drove with an electric leaf blower. So there's a bit of disconnect between what we're hearing and what's in the report. And I have lots of questions around how the numbers were arrived at. As someone who's a teacher, among other things, I like my students to show their work. And so I wasn't really seeing the full breakdown of how these costs work. And in my experience with electric leaf blowers and the research I've done on it, for context, I'm working on a campaign to ban them up here in Saanich. They save a lot of money, as Mr. Hadley mentioned, in maintenance and gas costs. So I wasn't really sure how the numbers were arrived at in 2014, and I think that times have changed. So a couple other questions to build on, and these are maybe questions that can be addressed after I wrap up my comments. But yeah, the first one deals with the question of costs. So the technology has changed. I think it's citing the most expensive tools on the market probably don't provide an accurate picture of what's being done. And I think Mr. Hadley mentioned in his comments that other municipalities have made significant changes. City of Victoria, for example, is committed to having all of its tools and small engine-driven equipment to be renewably powered by 2025. And I think the proposals and recommendations in this report set Oak Bay back a long way. And there's also, I think, a bit of disconnect between some of the content we're hearing about what we currently are doing, what we currently have the capacity to do, and what currently works in Oak Bay and for residents, but at the same time, what's being recommended in the recommendations. And so just to quickly summarize a couple things I think are absent in the report, there isn't a mention of greenhouse gases or climate change. And I think this has to be included in the report. We can't just focus on economics. Councilor May mentioned this in a question, but really, when you have a sustainable procurement policy, we need to be looking at the greenhouse gas emissions of these tools. Oak Bay has, after all, declared a climate emergency. Second thing is noise pollution is not mentioned. And I think that's very important and must be included in a report of this nature before Oak Bay can make a decision on it. And thirdly, and this was mentioned by Mr. Hidlay, and it's not mentioned in the report, but worker health and safety is critical. And so, when we're looking at the costs that are involved with these kinds of tools and transitioning to electrics and the reason to do so, worker safety should be front and center, and it's not in this report. So that's kind of lacking. And so what I was going to recommend that council do, because I don't think there's enough information in this report in order for you to make a good decision, and I don't think the recommendations that are presented in the report represent an accurate, full range of options available to you, is I was going to recommend that this report be sent back to be fully reviewed and include such things that are currently missing, like some of the environmental impacts, noise, worker safety. And also, for example, was mentioned a few of the questions around a phased-in approach. We're hearing that these electric leaf blowers and electric lawn maintenance equipment is fully functional for residential properties, and yet the recommendation is to take no action. I think there's a bit of disconnect between what we're seeing, what we're hearing, and the recommendations that are made. So my thought, as someone who's studied this issue over the last year and a half, working on a campaign in Saanich, would be that staff reconsider the report and fully explore all these externalities that are not currently being included in the calculuses, and use more up-to-date, accurate data as far as costs, because times have changed. New machines are more cost-effective, and we do need to be transitioning away from gasoline. We are in a climate emergency, and if we can't transition away from very simple landscaping tools, then our chances of dealing with climate change are hopeless.
Thank you for your comments. I'll put one of those just as a question to staff about the source of the costing. Was that 2014 numbers, or are those current costing numbers that were used in the report? Mr. Hidlay?
Sorry, Your Worship. It was a 2014 trial, and it was using the electric blower as compared to the two leaf blowers that we currently use for the majority of our work during a wet day. And what we did was took about a kilometer of
Sorry,
street
Mr. Hidlay.
and
Mr. Hidlay, sorry to interrupt. So I understand the procedure of testing against each other for suitability, but the question of the costs of the units, are those current costs, or are those older costs that were used in the report? The $4,200 and the $600 comparison. Are those current costs? Sorry,
those are current costs from the supplier. $4,200 for a new backpack leaf blower that is almost equivalent to a 500 series.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make clear, because the caller had called in and suggested that those were 7-year-old numbers, the dollar numbers. I just want to make sure we're clarifying between the trial, the functionality versus the cost discussion. So thank you for that. Ms. Varela, did you want to add anything else in there, or are you?
Just a note, Your Worship, that the staff report wasn't intended to be exhaustive nor to cover all the relevant issues with such a large discussion. So if council did require or desire more information, they can always send that back to staff. Again, we'll just wait council direction on how much more additional information that you want.
Yes, thank you. And I'll just point out anybody again who's wishing to speak from the public on this item. You just have to hit *9 to raise your hand if you're on the phone, and that way staff can know that you wish to speak, and we will let you into the meeting. So again, *9 raises your hand, and staff will allow you to be unmuted, and you can speak to address council. I understand there's at least one more, perhaps several. So Ms. Williams, is there another speaker? Okay. I believe will they know who they are? Okay, so welcome to the meeting. If you could just state your name and municipality of residence for the record.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know I was on. It's Andrea Careless, and I represent the Oak Bay Climate Force, OBCF as we usually call ourselves. So thank you, Mr. Hadley, for that really good coverage and explanation of the report. And Councillor Ney, I'd just like to echo pretty much everything she said and talked about. I agree, so sort of what she said. And as well, I also agree with what Teal Bondurant Phelps said about, in general, again, I agree with him, but specifically, I do feel that the report has to be sent back for a much more full examination of the entire issue. I mean, okay, for us, of course, the reason that we've been pushing for a ban on gas-powered equipment is that we think, I mean, because of the contribution it makes to greenhouse gas emissions in Oak Bay. And I'd like to clarify that we think a phase out of such equipment, not an immediate ban, would be the only way to go. And, you know, I'm just going to repeat that, as you know, I don't want to, you know all this, but Oak Bay has committed to putting a climate lens on all activities. And as Teal mentioned, you declared a climate emergency in 2019. And the Community Climate Action Working Group has just put a ton of work into putting in a climate action plan for you. And you voted on 4 of the 5 recommendations, and they're in the budget, which is fantastic. So that's why I think the report really, okay, same thing. Mr. Hidlay talked about what I was wondering about the climate change ramifications, the effect on insects, etc., of leaf blowers, for example. But I didn't see any of that in the report, and it really has to be in there. Like, it's almost hypocritical for it not to, for climate change not to even be mentioned in greenhouse gas emissions. So that's where we're coming from. And I just also, we're talking about environmental goals, and we're talking about the financial implications, but we're not talking full cycle. I mean, we're not talking about the cost down the line of increased greenhouse gas emissions and the cost of maybe a higher cost now of phasing out gas-powered equipment. So anyway, I don't see that full cycle examination. With respect to talking to commercial operations, I also wonder, have you talked to them all? Because again, I know a couple who are just as Councillor Ney said, are doing fantastically. So I don't know, has it just been sort of an anecdotal, well, from these people or that people, or do you have kind of data? I mean, I'd like to see an Excel sheet or something like that. This is, that is just science-based, I could put it that way. Also, I wonder, when you're talking about the fall leaf program, and I understand that you need the leaf blowers for huge amounts of leaves, but is there room in your leaf program to not blow the leaves? I mean, I'm not sure what you do, say, with parks and that kind of thing. Do you leave the leaves? So is there a place you could cut down on the use of your leaf blowers? And then getting to the community and commercial operations, I don't understand why we can't start with the community. I don't understand why we're not going for option 2. I mean, why are we doing nothing? It's so possible that we can start to phase out with education the use of gas-powered equipment. I mean, people know about it. It just seems to me like, again, but it seems a little bit hypocritical. I do understand the effect on commercial operations, of course, especially in times of COVID, and they can't just automatically switch over to electricity and we just say, it's too bad. It's sort of like fossil fuel workers, right? You can't just say, no more pipelines, you have no jobs, right? We have to help them transition. So same thing here. So I do believe that there should be a phase out for them. I also wonder, is it possible that there are any provincial or federal incentives for them to switch to electrical equipment? And also, I do want to say that, now this may not apply at all, but when I worked in the Ministry of Environment, we worked in air quality, and at one time the government brought in a clean vehicles and fuels regulation that required, sort of like gradually cleaner fuels and cleaner vehicles or over a certain time period. And the industry, they're big and they're mighty and they're not the same as small commercial operations, but they said, no, there's no way that we can do it. It's impossible. We'll lose money. Guess what? They did it. And I've seen that a lot in the Ministry of Environment. As I said, commercial operations, these are small guys, and I'm not going to compare them to huge industry, but it is possible that they may be exaggerating. Okay, so that's pretty much all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for letting me talk that long, and I'll say goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Careless. Is there another speaker? I think I just got a buzz to say yes.
No, Your Worship.
Okay. No other speakers raising their hands? Again, star 9 if there's no other people on the line. Okay, thank you. So thank you for the members of the public who called in and spoke to us. And we're back to this table here. We have a report and some recommendations, but council can give... Oh, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. And I appreciate all the comments that have come forward so far and from my colleagues as well. I do take a little bit of offense at the attack on the or what I would consider an attack on the staff report. I actually found the staff report for what we had asked the staff to come back with. I think that it came back with all of the information that we need to be able to make a decision. I think that Mr. Hidlay has really laid out that, and you can tell from his comments that our Parks Department is really wanting to go down this road of having electric equipment. And so to me, they are following the sustainable purchase practice when they can. And it would be up to us to put more money in their budget to be able to do that. And that's, again, as Mr. As our Director of Finance said, that's up to us as a governance thing to be able to do that. I'm actually happy with the recommendations that Mr. Hidlay has put forward. I think that we really need to sit back and consider that we want to be, and I think it says it in the report, that we want to be within having all of our equipment electrical by the end of 2025. I think that's a fine thing to aspire to. I think that if we do it properly, we can get good equipment. We can get some of the equipment that is being out there right now is not up to par for what we would need to use, but some is, as Mr. Hidlay has said. He has said that we can use some of it right away, and they are using some of it right away. So I feel very comfortable with his recommendation of option number 2 for municipal operations. And as far as residential goes, I have talked to, as Councillor Ney has, I have talked to a lot of gardeners as well, and I have talked to both ones that have electric equipment and ones who don't. The ones that I've talked to that have electric equipment came on board with electric equipment right from the onset. The ones that don't have electric equipment right now would have to replace all of those. So I think that that's something we have to be really careful of, is to put something on an organization, or sorry, a company right now where they would have to outlay more money at a time of COVID to change to all electric equipment would be really hard on them. So I think that I also feel that it would be better for the municipality to set the example of switching to electric equipment and educating the public on how to achieve that for themselves. So for me, I would go along with the report, and I would do option number 2 for the municipal operations and option number 1 for the residential and commercial operators. And I'll be interested to hear comments from my fellow staff members, or fellow council members.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Are there any other comments?
Yes, it's Councillor Green.
Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Not Councillor Ney. I would just like to say that I really, as well, appreciate all the comments, both from the public, from the correspondents, and from Mr. Hidlay, also from Councillor Ney, Councillor Braithwaite, and so on. I think I would agree with Councillor Braithwaite at this stage. Under municipal operations, the recommended option is going to provide us an opportunity as a municipality to show leadership also give us time to assess the efficacy of converting to greener technology. I think what I like is that there is a goal here implicit in option number 2, and that is that we are taking a leadership role over time to look at green technology. It also gives us a chance as a municipality to test some of this equipment, both for, as I said, efficacy, also for cost, the implications around batteries and battery charging and so on. And that in subsequently will inform residential and commercial operators. So I think that we will show leadership, we will test the equipment, and be able to comment on costs and implications as people make a transition. And I agree that public education at this point is probably the most important piece. And it also gives us a chance perhaps to work more closely with private and commercial landscaping groups in our community that are in our community a lot, and perhaps help them through a transition as well, and provide some demonstration projects. I think it's wide open, but I also think implicit in all of this is that we have articulated a goal for greener technology. We are going to move forward. I'm assuming it would be a phased-in approach, as indicated in the first section under municipal operations. And I, too, appreciate the report. And I think we can always come back and look at this again with Mr. Hidlay and with Mr. Payne. If things change and, there are other advantages and perhaps grants available, then that can also be information added to the mix. But I think the core goal is that we are moving in the right direction as a municipality. And hopefully that will influence both commercial operators and our community as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Are there any other comments? Councillor Appleton and Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, just a question of procedure here, and there are a number of options for both municipal operations and residential and commercial operators. I'm just wondering whether or not these could be dealt with separately, whether or not we could present motions for selecting a given option separately for the two different categories here.
You absolutely may, or any member of council may make motions. It makes sense to me to consider them possibly separately so we can have two different debates. I also want to just be cognizant of time, that we focus our conversations in a way that gets us to a decision-making point as well. Thank you. Councillor Appleton, if you have anything else?
Yeah, then I would make a motion essentially to sever these two recommendations and debate separately on municipal operations options and residential and commercial operator options.
Sure, there's no, thank you for the suggestion. I'm as a chair happy to, that's my discretion, I'm happy to separate the two. They're not really, normally we'd have two separate motions that I would split active motions, but I'll just, in this case, procedurally handle this. So if we want to have a quick conversation about our municipal operations first, let's keep our focus on that. Do you have something to raise to that, Councillor Appleton?
Was that a motion? Was it seconded?
There's no motion at this time. It's just, I'm just asking people to keep their comments on the municipal operations side, and then we'll get to the residential and commercial separate. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would put forward, I appreciate the comments that have been made thus far. My concern about, I do not believe, well, obviously option one is, to me, not an option. My concern circling around option two for municipal operations is that it does actually not move us forward. It commits us to a idea of reducing impacts from this type of machinery, but only under such circumstances as it doesn't cost us any money and it doesn't change the way that we do business. And what we've seen and heard from the available equipment is that those things are not currently possible. We are not able to do both of those things under current constraints. So my preference is actually for option 4, because it allows the staff to make substantive movement towards transitioning to new equipment without concern about maintaining what, in my opinion, would be, in some cases, an artificially high level of service. So I think that, in my opinion, the conversation around many aspects of municipal operations, this being a good one of them, is to revisit our idea of what constitutes an appropriate service level. If we wish to make a substantive impact on climate action, we have to decide what that is worth for us as a community. And so to be fiscally responsible and also action climate in a way that we need to do, the service level adjustment is something that I believe we need to sort of wrap our heads around as a community.
Okay, so you're making a motion for option 4. Is there a seconder for that motion?
Councillor Zelka, I will second the motion.
Okay, we've moved and seconded. You've already motivated. Probably should have taken the motion first, but thank you for that. Do you want to add anything else?
No, thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I also appreciate the comments that we received from the public. But I very much appreciate the report that Mr. Heidelay put forward. I think his report was put forward really in the context of what preceded that, and I don't want to forget that we did, as a council, support staff's recommendation for the sustainable procurement policy. And in that policy, it does say that as a district, we will consider environmental, social, and economic value of the goods and services, and that our intent is to shift away from spending on goods and services that negatively impact the environment and society towards goods and services that are more environmentally sound and socially beneficial. And that we will seek ways to encourage and influence markets environmentally and socially for preferable goods, and also work on employee education, supporting pilot testing of potential new goods, and adopting innovative good standards. And I think in Mr. Heidelay's remarks, he demonstrated that the staff took the sustainable procurement policy to heart, and that they are using that as an objective to work towards in evaluating everything that they do. When I don't have a problem supporting option 2, I can see again why Mr. Heidelay would recommend it, because they will work on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions through changes in equipment. And also, although it says that they will proceed on the condition that service levels are not impacted and there's no incremental financial impacts, I take that to be, and perhaps Mr. Heidelay can clarify this, that in doing that, they would come back to council with our financial planning process that we go through based on knowledge that they gain from what their investigations and their experience demonstrates to them, and make recommendations to us that would then align with our district goals to make changes to the financial plan, to support changes in those objectives, so that we keep the whole process flowing together, and we're not trying to change just to suit each individual issue that comes forward, but to keep it aligned with the goals. But I think our sustainable procurement policy was really well thought out by all members of the staff, and clear on the intent of the staff and the district to move ahead in an environmentally sustainable manner. So I'm quite happy supporting the options that staff have come forward with, because I think that I understand their intent in aligning it to the sustainable procurement policy.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Does anybody else wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Ney and then Councillor Braithwaite.
Well, the problem I'm having is that, I mean, actually aligned with Councillor Patterson, is that we've got this approach to these kinds of issues, right? We've got a sustainable procurement policy, and it's for our staff to figure that out, and we're trying to give direction here, but I don't feel like I can make a decision here whether to decrease park service levels or change budgeting, operating budgets with staff. And what I'd like to see is for staff to come back with, they understand what the technology that's in sight for us to purchase. They know what the job is that needs to be done, and to bring us back with some phased-in plan to transition from gas-powered garden equipment as it will work in that department. But I'm not happy to put the constraint of whether to increase the budget or to tell them whether they're going to have to decrease or increase service levels based on the purchase of these non-carbon garden equipment. So I'm not comfortable with either of these options for that reason, because I would rather just leave it open for staff to come back with a report and a plan about how they anticipate doing this, to be able to continue doing their job, and if they need more money, to explain that. But before we start talking about budget increases, I would want a more holistic cost analysis that includes the cost, the social, the environmental, and the economic costs, so that we can put them all together and make a decision. It's not just about money when it comes to making these transitions. And I think we can all agree we would like to make a just transition. We know that. We want to make it right and fair and equitable, etc. But so it is going to cost money, but or it may not, depending on the technology and what happens. So that's where I'm at. I'm having difficulty with any of these options, and I would look to a different motion on the floor. But
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ney. Councillor Braithwaite?
Thank you, Mayor. I would, I think just to touch upon something that Councillor Ney said, and I understand where she's coming from, but to me, when I look at the report and when I hear the words that Mr. Hidlay said, I believe that we are doing a phased-in plan, and that's what he spoke to. And so that's why I feel comfortable supporting option 2, but I don't feel comfortable supporting option 4. So I would be voting against the motion that's on the floor because, and going to some of the comments from Councillor Patterson, I believe that staff is moving in the right direction for this, and that's the intent, is that they are moving towards a phased-in approach. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the motion?
Councillor Zelka?
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. I seconded option 4 because Oak Bay on the 8th of April 2019 declared a climate emergency declaration. And in that declaration, we passed the policy, essentially, that District of Oak Bay declare a climate emergency and work towards the goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. And that the district incorporate revised carbon neutrality goals into the 2020 and subsequent year strategic plans. I wish to demonstrably support that effort. And what that means is that we cannot do things as they have always been done in the past. We have to come up with new ways of doing things. It is entirely possible that our service levels will have to change. I know it's hard for people to pay higher taxes, so I'd rather look at the service levels rather than increasing taxes if I had a choice between those two. But something's got to give. And as a project manager, you've got basically you can set a budget, you can set features, or you can set time or scope. If you fix all three, you don't have a project. You have a fiction. That's why I'm supporting option 4 to provide the wiggle room needed by staff to make necessary changes to achieve the climate emergency declaration that we set in 2019. And I would hope that the majority of council agrees with me.
Thank you very much, Councillor Zelka. I think that was a unanimous vote, so I think you have agreement from council on that piece of it. The how to get there is probably the thing that we're struggling with a bit today. So is there any other discussion on this motion?
I'd just like to
Go ahead,
make a
Councillor Nay.
comment that, in response to Councillor Zelka's observation around option 4, that what I'm struggling with here is that if I look at another option like option 3 that would call to increase operating budget as a way to overcome the impact of this transition on the parks, I don't know what kind of money I'm talking about. So I don't know, and I also don't know how much we're talking about in terms of decreasing park service levels. I don't have that detail. Like, what kind of dysfunction is that going to incur? I don't have that information in front of me to be able to make that decision. It's too general for me. So I'm having trouble with all the options, quite frankly. because I don't have enough information to give.
Your microphone is off. Can you just turn it back on?
Yeah.
Oh. Thank you, Councillor Nay. I think Ms. Rella wishes to speak, but I think in interest of just procedure here, I'll, seeing no other hands on the topic, I'll just speak to the motion, and then we can, I'll take Ms. Rella's comment as well. I will say I understand this is a little bit difficult because we are, as Councillor Nay points out, we don't have the exact answers for that. I won't support the motion as is made because, again, I can't, not knowing what the decrease in park service levels would be. I would frankly be very supportive of option 2, perhaps with just the addition of the word no incremental operational financial impacts, because that would free up staff to go and bring back capital plans to, say, go out and do a call for technology that could then put us on the roadmap, but would require us to deal with that as a capital level. But I think our not knowing the service level or operational cost impacts, I think those are the two critical ones, and the capital piece would be a potential. But I think in the wording of option 4, I don't think 2, 3, or 4 are necessarily significantly different in how they might get implemented, but I think I share Councillor Nay's concern about the lack of specificity of what that decrease might look like. And so I think I'd rather leave it in option 2's hands with a bit of maybe a clarification that the operational costs stay the same, but capital costs could be increased to get there quicker. Ms. Varela, did you have anything else to add?
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe the idea is that option 2 would keep us on the existing path without a further robust review by staff. If council chose to prioritize option 3 or 4 for further staff review, then we would be discussing that either tonight or at Thursday's corporate planning session, and you could direct staff to go and undertake that. You wouldn't want to go and do that kind of robust analysis without some direction from council. So this is staff's attempt to not go out on the diving board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The motion is live on the table. With that input from Ms. Varela, is there any additional comments? Otherwise, I'll call the question.
Councillor Zelka?
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Comment?
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. For me, the operating word is to plan as opposed to implement. This is not a motion to go out and just do it. That's not reasonable. And what I love about our senior management is that they are very good at coming back with plans so that they can be signed off by council before we actually proceed. While I agree, we don't have all the details, but we also haven't given staff the money to pull, or the time to pull together all the details needed to make a robust decision. With respect to moving forward, I appreciate that all of these options, the operating word is to plan. That's while I hear people are uncomfortable with lack of specificity, that's normal for a plan. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other comments? Go ahead, Councillor Nay.
Just on that point, Councillor Zelka made, then I wondered if the option, we'll see what happens with option 4, but with regards to the word plan, if council direct staff to provide a plan so that then we can see what what the impacts are with the pace of uptake of the technology would be.
Okay, thank you. I think, and maybe Ms. Reller, Mr. Heidley, you can guide us on that one. I read that all of them essentially come back with a plan to reduce the small engine pieces, where the difference between them from a governance level is, are we going to prioritize the budget? Are we going to prioritize, ask them to come back with a plan on how to manage that through service level adjustments, or something else? And I think that's the direction we're trying to give as a governance lens. But Ms. Reller, perhaps you could.
Thank you, Your Worship. So if Council was looking for additional analysis as per option 3 or option 4, senior management probably needs the opportunity to talk about what that looks like, if we can manage that in-house, or if I need to get an external consultant, and if there's budget impacts to it. But I think if we could come back on Thursday, if Council wasn't ready to provide direction tonight, it is another option, and we could have a bit of a discussion to come back with you a little more prepared.
Thanks, Ms. Reller. We have a motion on the table right now to talk to. So any other discussion on this motion? I don't know, option number 4.
Could I make one more comment, Your Worship?
Yes, it's unusual, but go ahead, Mr. Heidley.
Oh, if it's unusual, I don't want to do it. I don't want to.
Well, I invited a comment on the notion of a plan as part of these motions. So I think it's in order for if you wish to add. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, in conversation with the 2 largest manufacturers of electric equipment, that's Stihl and Husqvarna, they fully anticipate within the next 5 years that the questions that we ask in regards to performance of equipment will be adequate or equivalent to what we are using now. That's why that came forward as a recommendation. It wouldn't impact service levels. There may be a small capital expenditure to purchase some of this equipment. I'd like to give one further example. The district maintains 2.1 kilometers of hedge throughout Windsor Park is a good example of part of that hedge. That is easily maintained with currently available electric hedge trimmers now. So that's where we are. So things are progressing quickly, and that's why number 2 was the recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Heidley. We have option 4 on the table for discussion. Any other discussion?
Excuse me.
Oh, Councillor Green, did you wish to add?
Excuse me, Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Green.
I just wondered, could you or could someone reiterate the current motion that we're voting on, please?
Sure. It's under municipal operations, option number 4, which is direct staff to plan a small engine reduction. Do you have that option 4 in front of you?
Okay.
I
just wanted to make sure it was option 4. Thank you.
Option 4, which highlights the decreased park service level should it be required, and using that as the basis for the plan. Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands up or any other voices, so I will call the question. Again, thank you for the clarification on option 4 under municipal operations. So all those in favor? Can I talk, Councillor Green?
I'm opposed.
Councillor Zelka?
I'm in favor.
And all those opposed? So I have Councillor. Oh.
Sorry, option 4?
Option 4.
Yeah,
okay, so we have Councillor Ney, Braithwaite, Patterson, Green, and Murdoch opposed to option 4. So that motion fails.
I'd like to move option number 2 and add the word operational in between incremental and financial.
Second.
Thank you. As that's moved in second, I just want to make sure that that addition does not substantially change the intention of option 2 from staff's perspective. So Mr. Heidley, does that, I think that's sort of what I heard when you were making the comments, that was sort of your thought that you may come back with additional capital requests, but the operational pieces would be tried to keep maintained. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Worship.
Okay. Okay, so the motion, just for clarification, option 2 with no incremental, with the word optional financial, operational financial impacts. Okay. So that's moved and seconded. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Braithwaite?
No, I think that everything's been said. Just going back to my comments from before and Councillor Patterson's comments as well.
Any other discussion on option 2? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
I'll be very brief, speaking in opposition to the motion. Climate action will, at some point, cause an impact to the operations of the district. If we want to take action in respect to our climate action emergency declaration, it will ultimately have a financial or an operational cost or both. If we are committed to taking action, we should do so quickly and not on an extended timeline such that it eventually becomes essentially revenue neutral. We have an option to move forward more aggressively here, and I believe we should take it.
Go ahead, Councillor
So
Ney.
my comments are really aligned with Councillor Appleton, and I think it's troublesome to constrain the financial impact. I would like to see what kind of impact, because you're going to anticipate an impact, very, very likely, unless you're looking at doing this sometime down the road. But we did sign on this emergency. We're 2 years into the 10 years here. I mean, so we're going to wait 5 years before we do this because we won't put a bit of money into the pot here to do this. And furthermore, I mean, we're getting just so tight-fisted around adding any kind of money, and Councillor Appleton said it very well. You're going to anticipate some kind of cost doing the transition. If we constrain the ability of staff to engage in a plan with no financial increases, should that be required, then we're going to be waiting till the cows come home. It's just not. And the other thing is, we don't know how much money. This could be pennies, you know, if we're talking like $10,000 or whatever. To the average taxpayer, it's like a nickel or something. Because we don't know the number. If staff comes back with a plan that says that it's going to cost X amount more, I'd like to see that plan and make that decision at the council table. So I'm not in agreement with constraining the ability of staff to design a plan within the current, without any financial increments.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. Are there any other speakers to the motion?
Councillor Zelka?
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
I'm afraid I'll be speaking against the motion for the decisions or the words already shared by my other two council colleagues, but also option 2, without providing staff an ability to make changes other than possible future technological changes coming forward that we don't know about. That seems to be the only thing that might allow a change of behavior. But I find option 2 to be much too restrictive and ties staff's hands from providing potential options on how we could proceed. So I wish there was maybe a 5th option that wasn't so restrictive. As a project management perspective, this makes no sense. So the question I would ask related to this, if I may, please, through you to staff, if it's appropriate, will there be a measurement of climate greenhouse gas reductions as part of option 2 plans? Should we proceed with this?
Sure, Mr. Hidley.
Thank you, Councillor Zilko. I would have to give that some thought in regards to how I would calculate that. But there certainly would be a considerable reduction, especially taking into consideration just what horrific polluters 2-stroke engines are. And certainly, as was mentioned by Dr. Phelps, the benefit to the worker in regards to not working around the emissions of 2-stroke engines.
Thank you, Mr. Hidley.
No, I absolutely agree with you, Mr. Hidley. There's lots and lots of different lenses on approaching this one, but with respect specifically to the climate emergency declaration we agreed to as a policy on the 8th of April 2019, where yearly, the district will incorporate revised carbon neutrality goals and subsequent year strategic plans. So maybe on Thursday, as part of the yearly strategic planning, we will this will be highlighted, or at least some light will come to the opaqueness that I currently have in this area. I'm curious to see what Oak Bay senior management has with respect to subsequent year strategic plans on reducing carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Braithwaite and Councillor Patterson on the motion made.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to just say that I totally understand and I hear where my fellow councillors are coming from, and I agree with most of your comments. I think that where I differ a little bit is that I understand that we're signed on to be carbon neutral by 2030. I think we're starting. It takes steps sometimes. I think that in particular, our Parks Department is really going above and beyond in bringing ideas to us and already starting to switch out equipment. And that's why I'm confident that option 2 will serve us well, because I know that from past experience and from history speaks volumes on this, that our staff, no matter what department they're in, always come to us with new ideas. And when they can see some way that our municipality can help the environment or do something that will be good for the municipality and the environment at the same time, they bring it forward. And that's what we see from them whenever they come with their staff reports, etc. And so I'm confident that that will still happen. And so that's why I'm very supportive of option number 2.
Thank you. And I have Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. And, you know, I think in some of these discussions we're arguing around a situation where we all respect the intent of what has been proposed. We all respected the declaration of the climate emergency, and I think that is the common goal that we all share, and we share it with the district staff. It's really how we get there. And where I have difficulty is when we are in the financial plan and we see lists of all of the capital equipment. It's not hidden. There's lists of every item, and I just am of the belief that that is the proper time to be really scrutinizing what staff are putting forward, asking the questions then, so that we are not trying to then direct staff outside of that process to go ahead and make decisions that we're not part of, that we all take serious consideration of the capital plans that are put forward with the financial planning, and we look at the listing of equipment, and if we want to place emphasis on the environmental sustainability of anything in the listing, that we do it at that time, whether it be parks-related equipment or other departmental equipment or buildings, whatever we're doing, that is a time that we really have the opportunity to go forward in our planning as to how we want to do this. I think it would be very difficult to give directives to staff to say just move ahead implementing this. Dispose of existing equipment we have. You know, that places a lot of emphasis on staff making the decision without the input of council, and I think it's really a shared decision-making process, and we should stay all aligned with the process that also then ties in what our aspirations are, what the budget will be, so that the community understands where we're headed on all of this, and staff have a clear directive of how it all fits with all of our planning, our corporate plan, our financial plan, and our environmental strategy. So I'm good at supporting this option 2.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Just very quickly, I would support option 2 if the last phrase wasn't there about no incremental financial impacts. And the other, I'll just say,
It's just the motion that was made was no incremental operational financial impact. So it doesn't, it eliminates the constraint on capital.
oh, I see, okay. Okay, that actually changes it for me. Okay, actually, yeah. Okay, sorry, I missed that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other comments?
Yes, Mayor.
Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Or Councillor Green, rather, sorry. I just want to say that I will support option 2. And I also want to say that I would agree. Our staff generally has worked really hard to move in this direction around climate change action. I feel it's unfair to leave the impression, perhaps, that we're not being proactive. I think we're doing the best we can under very difficult circumstances. But I think about the police, for instance. They will have 2 electric vehicles on their fleet. I think about the rec center and all of the efforts that have been made there to reduce GHGs. I think about our Blue Box program through the CRD. There are many, many things that OBE is trying to do. But climate change, emergency, that is a worldwide issue. It is a national issue. And it's very difficult sometimes to get your head around what locally we can do. And I think I agree with Councillor Braithwaite and others that our park staff in particular have been tremendous in supporting green initiatives and also greening Oak Bay. Parks, for instance, these are absolutely critical to the quality of life and well-being in this community. And I know how much all of us, including our community, values parks. So just the thought of even decreasing surface levels there would be, for me, unacceptable, and I think it would be for the community as well. That is part and parcel of climate and climate change, and I think about the Friends of Uplands Park who do so much to maintain that environment. I think about Heritage, who does a lot to try and conserve houses so that we're not building houses or destroying houses all of the time that aren't going to contribute to any more pollution. We have some issues around that, but I think overall, I think we have created a culture, an environment, and an attitude in Oak Bay that cares about climate and cares about climate change. So I don't think I'm feeling as negative about this option. I think it's a reasonable option, and I think the change in wording at the very end really helps. And I would like to thank the Parks Department for bringing forward this report and the options, which does give us some ability to be more agile on some of these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. Any other comments on this? Oh, sorry, Councillor Green. I just did that. Oh,
I'm getting a real complex.
Still got an hour to go in this meeting. I bet that's not so good. I'm slipping already. Any other comments as we go? Councillor Appleton, go ahead. Speak for a second time.
Thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity to speak a second time. Respectfully, in response to some of the comments that have been made here, taking issue with any of the options in the report is not reflective of what staff have proposed or what staff have been doing. This is a governance decision, and it is not a matter of whether or not we have been making progress. Any organization can be said to have been making incremental progress and making solid progress. I do not debate that point. We, as a governance body, I feel, need to act with intent to take action on climate. So this is not a matter of whether or not we are acting on this or whether or not we consider it to be important. Those things, I believe, are clear. We are on a timeline, and we are running out of time. And so if we fail to act with intent as a governance body, I feel that we're not living up to our declaration of the climate emergency.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I'll just for point of clarification on this, and I do support the motion. I think the importance of allowing staff to be innovative and going out, in the short to medium term, to set a new standard for electrification of our small engine replacement makes me comfortable. I also note that this does include a review of district landscaping and maintenance standards to allow for some of the operational changes as well. So we're endorsing that portion of it as well. And I do appreciate there's a, you can interpret the sense of urgency how you see fit. At the end of the day, I think we all have to rely a certain degree on the expertise of the staff who are working with this and looking at this on a day-to-day basis of how feasible the technology fits into our operational standards and how much we can change or not change to adapt. And I'm very heartened by Mr. Heideley's words about how clearly he's passionately about this subject. And I certainly see that whole organization is working very hard to get us there quickly, starting immediately on some of the tools and working down that path. So I'm quite comfortable with option 2 with the modification to clarify that we're not cutting back anything on the capital side of the equation. With that, I'm happy to call the question. All those in favor of the modified option 2? And those opposed? Councillor Green?
Yes, I'm in favor.
Councillor Zelka?
I'm opposed. Thank you.
So that passes with Councillor Zelka and Councillor Appleton opposed. The second part of this equation is the residential and commercial operators. And I'm just noticing in the interest of time here, perhaps we might want to deal with this separately. But Councillor Ney, did you, based on the conversation we've had so far on this?
We have some options before us on the residential. I do have a question of staff, because one of them I'm not quite clear about, option 2, that speaks to implement more stringent use restrictions. I don't quite understand how that would look, actually.
Sure, thank you. Mr. Heideley, can you perhaps address that?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and thanks for the question, Councillor Ney. What I was referring to there was depending, the example that I was thinking about was from spring to fall, where you have very light leaf loads. That's where you could look at restrictions in regards to gas-powered leaf blowers to do general yard cleanup, hence reducing emissions and noise and et cetera. So that was one of the time frames that could be taken into consideration for leaf blower use.
So we're going to talk about the residential one right now, Mr. Mayor.
That's correct, yes.
So the way I see this is I could, option 2 provides these restrictions, which kind of makes sense to me if we were talking about a phased-in program. So part of the phasing in could be that these restrictions were in place with a view to, by a certain date, the gas-powered garden equipment would be banned. But I think it should all be packaged together. And I don't agree with option 3, where we just outright ban. I think that's too abrupt and doesn't give the community or the commercial operators time to make the adjustment. So I'd like to see. I guess my suggestion, if I may, Mr. Mayor, I mean, I'll be interested to hear from the others, but I'd like to suggest option 2, but that the wording include a phased-in program that would begin with stringent use restrictions, a phased-in program to ban gas-powered leaf blowers, beginning with stringent use restrictions, yada yada, for the rest of it. So that would be the motion.
Sure, and I'm just going to, I'll probably get you to repeat that portion of the motion just so that we're all very clear about what you're suggesting on that one, because you should make the motion and then we can see if there's a seconder and talk to that motion.
Okay.
So it was essentially to move towards
to implement a phased-in program that would begin with stringent use restrictions.
et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, it gets a little redundant there, but
Okay,
yeah.
well, we'll take that, and this would come back with a report from staff if that was to move forward, with the implications, et cetera, for that. So I think that adding that adds the clarity of your expectations. Is there a seconder for that motion? seconded by Councillor Appleton. And any, you want to add anything else, Councillor Nay?
Yeah, no, I'll just speak to, staff has stated that the current status of the technology would be suitable for residential properties in our community. And I think with leadership coming from the council, a lot of people will look to make that transition who are immediately. And as we work towards sort of restricting the use of leaf blowers, they will become more self-conscious, and attention will be brought to how we're using these leaf blowers. So, and I think the education program is critical to support residents and commercial company. I think the commercial companies will follow once the commercial guys see that residents are demanding, they're wanting cleaner technology on their property, they'll be more incentivized to start to make the transition. So I think this community, my read on the community is they're ready for us to, for the council to take a leadership stand and begin to begin this kind of program. So, yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nay. Councillor Appleton, did you want to add anything to the?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would take the opportunity to mention, unfortunately, as council will recall, a good portion of the Community Climate Action Work Group recommendations haven't been able to be actioned this past year with respect to COVID. But I guess I would take the opportunity to remind council that the community grant program that was envisioned by the Climate Action Work Group was envisioned to be an incentive for exactly programs like this. So we've heard really clearly that there is obviously a financial cost to upgrading equipment, and that electric equipment is incrementally more expensive in a lot of cases. For residential users, the grant program, which was approved by council under the Climate Action Work Group, and in fact is funded, as council will recall, could offer an opportunity to offset costs incurred by the community to help meet this phase-in. So I'm definitely a carrot rather than stick approach on this, and I think that we actually have the carrot already in our budget.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. This would have to come back for consideration in terms of its impact in pieces, but that's the motion that's in front of us to do that, to understand where that fits. Is there any other discussion on this item? Go ahead, Councillor
Mayor?
Green.
Yes, I'm sorry. I just have a question on option 2 for Mr. Hidley. Would that be appropriate to ask him a question?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Hidley, what under option 2, under the residential and commercial, what would an example of a more stringent use restrictions plan look like? If you could provide an example, how would things change compared to current status?
Mr. Hidley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Green. What I would envision here would be a prohibition of gas-powered electric blowers from April until fall, when the leaves begin to come down. So it would be April till mid-October.
I see. Okay, so seasonal.
It would be seasonal. There would be an educational component to that, as mentioned, maybe sometimes some enforcement, but that is what I envision there.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. And a supplemental question, just generally, do we have the enforcement capacity at this time?
I think Ms. Varela would be it's a good question, because we obviously struggle with that overall. Go ahead, Ms. Varela.
Your worship, so what staff would be looking for here is direction to go away and research legislative authority to restrict or ban, as well as opportunities if there was a granting for business commercial replacement of equipment. We'd have to look at that assistance to business restriction. So this is again in the context of authority would have to have further direction that we'd bring back a report for. And again, we'd have to do the same in consultation with bylaw enforcement and council's direction on service level and available staff time. So again, we're looking for that more refined direction from council because these reports represent a lot of staff time and effort. So we want to make sure we're focused in writing you the report on the information you need.
So can I just,
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green, and thanks, Ms. Barella. Can I just, for our clarification, just so I understand what it is that we're asking for here, are we asking for that research to go and be done and come back, or are we asking for this, for you to come back with the estimate of cost and time required to undertake that work? Because I'm not sure that we have a full understanding of even just going and asking for that research to be done and coming back.
Respectfully, Your Worship, I think it might be worth the discussion for staff to take this away and come back with a more refined request for direction if we have a sense of council's general preference. I think the policy debate on your first item provided great insight for our next steps, and we'd be looking for that kind of direction here as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any other discussion on this?
Councillor Zelka?
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I won't be able to support option 2 with respect to residential and commercial operators. I'd like to see Oak Bay municipal operations that we get our plans and our implementation of our plans and our learnings done first, so that on municipal dime that the learnings are basically provided, and then we can at that point I believe would be the appropriate time to then ask our residential and commercial operators to learn from what and from the painful process that municipal operations had to go through. That's why if this fails, I'll be moving option 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I saw Councillor Braithwaite, you had your hand.
Yeah, I would agree with Councillor Zelka. I think that it would, for all of the same reasons, I would actually support option 1.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion on the motion? So a motion is option 2 with the insertion ahead of it of, sorry, if you could just repeat what you said there, Councillor Ney.
Begin a phased-in electric garden equipment ban that begins with stringent use restrictions, etc.
Gas ban.
Gas,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. You don't want to ban electric equipment. That would be counterproductive to our intent. We're all getting a little tired here. Okay, so thank you for that clarification. So that's the motion that's in front of council at this moment. I don't have any particular comments on this. I think it has its merits. I certainly would, if this passes, expect some indication to come back with what the costs and implications are. I hear fully the if this passes, that I agree fully with Councillor Braithwaite and Zelka that we'd be very dangerous to force our residents to do something that we're not undertaking ourselves. I think the pushback on that would be very strong. So I would anticipate perhaps we tie this in some way to the timelines that we end up setting for ourselves based on the report in the first part of this. So, okay, Councillor Ney, you wanted to add something else?
Okay, and just I'll just add that I think we've just voted that staff is moving forward with transitioning to electrification of the garden equipment. So I think we've already done that piece, and in fact, from what I heard, Mr. Hydley was saying they've already made purchases on numerous accounts. So the corporation is now taking the lead. If we want to demonstrate or speak to it or publicize it, they are doing it. They haven't got to the place where, it's a process right now. So I feel confident that we can turn to our corporation and say they are making making the change. And this motion speaks to a phasing in. And we don't have that number in front of us. That's not specified in the motion, but we're moving, the motion speaks to beginning the phase in with restricting the use of the leaf blowers, as they've done in many, many jurisdictions, to ensure the well-being and the enhance and promote the quality of life and sense of place in a community. And that's why they're doing it, because the sound and the smell of these gas-powered are infringing on people's ability to enjoy their homes. So I just wanted to point that out.
No, thank you very much, Councillor Ney, as the mover, for that clarification. Seeing any other discussion? Not seeing any. I am ready to call the question. All those in favor of the motion? And Councillor Green?
I'm opposed.
Councillor Zelka?
Opposed?
All those opposed in the room? So I have Councillor Braithwaite, Patterson, Zelka, and Green opposed. So that motion for option number 2 fails with the modification.
I'd like to move option number 1 under residential and commercial operators.
And I'll second that, please.
Moved and seconded. I don't know that it needs much motivation. I think the motion is fairly clear. Do you want to add anything, Councillor Braithwaite? No. Okay. Any discussions on this motion? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Obviously, in opposition to the motion on the table, in a situation where we're in a dire climate emergency, a recommendation that reads "take no further action at this time" is not acceptable with regards to this, in my mind.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
I don't really have anything more to say. I'm opposed to the motion, but yeah, okay. I just it is troubling that we're not able to make some movement on this initiative when it is clearly such an irritant to people in this community, and we've heard that over and over, particularly during COVID, and something that we know, this is actually a simple initiative in many ways, in the big scheme of things, to move forward to address a climate action in a way that we're able to in this community, and have a real direct impact on the climate, and on the livability of this community. So I'm opposed to the motion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ney. Councillor Braithwaite, you want to add something?
Yeah, thank you. Again, I hear what Councillor Ney and Councillor Appleton are saying. My hope would be that because of the direction that we're going with the municipal aspect of this, that we will be able to educate our residents over the next couple of years, and we will be able to get to where you want to be within 2 or 3 years, and that's my hope.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I certainly, I really have a lot of empathy, certainly, for what Councillor Appleton and Council Ney are putting forward. I too would like to move forward with that which we can directly control, the municipal portion of this, and I believe that we will all support that. I believe we also are very supportive of and we supported the Climate Action Task Force initiative to have to expand the program of public education for climate change, and initiatives can be taken. I mean, when it comes to some of the things like leaf blowers, I don't support gas or electric. I use a rake. Because that's my, that is my personal belief, and I consider the impact on the soil of both of those. And we all, as individuals, certainly can play a leadership role in how we manage things that are within our power. So I think that the intent around the council is to work towards this. It's just the practicality of what can be achieved, and I think it came to Councillor Appleton saying, use the carrot and not the stick, and so I think that the educational component and the leadership component can strongly influence what we want to have in the community and work towards those goals. And along the way, we may be able to, hopefully in the not too distant future, we're going to see a trend forward on all of these items. So I think that we have moved forward, perhaps not as rapidly as some people in the community would like, but we will keep taking steps forward. I am certain, and through the Climate Action Task Force recommendation of public education, that can go a long way to moving this along. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Any other speakers to the motion?
Yes, it's Councillor Green. Just very briefly, I think, again, and I echo others' comments, I appreciate that Councillor Appleton and Councillor Ney feel a great sense of urgency, and I understand that. But I think in this case, what I'm heartened by is, first of all, that the municipality is showing leadership and taking leadership in the direction we want it to go. And secondly, for this option, what I'm heartened by is no action, take no additional action at this time. At this time is critical because this is open-ended. This isn't saying that we're not going to take additional action in this area. It just says at this time, to give us time as a municipality, again, to demonstrate both leadership and educate about the equipment and all the various aspects. So I'm not depressed by option one. I think it gives us a chance to do the work on the ground that we have to do as a municipality, and then continue that leadership role in educating the public. But those are my feelings, and I will support option one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Green. Any other discussion before we call the question? I will call the question. I don't have any additional comments. I do actually do one comment on this. I think the motion as it stands is somewhat unsatisfactory because we complete a whole number of issues on this one issue of leaf blowers. There's noise, there's environment, there's soil issues, there's frankly, also taking into account people's capabilities of handling rakes or other equipment on some of the larger lots, or for physical disability reasons. So there's a whole conflation here of issues that we try and struggle with, and I think there may be actually a path forward that we can address maybe at least a subset of those concerns without. If this passes, and I'll perhaps talk with Councillor Ney, we can talk after this to see if there's some other path that we might take to address some of these going forward. Because I think we've all heard from the public and around this table the concerns of this, and letting it sit indefinitely as this seems to fit is not comfortable without having any other excellent options on the table. I think it's supportable. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor, this is option number one. Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
In favor, thank you.
And those opposed? I have Councillor Ney and Councillor Appleton opposed. So that motion passes. And with that, I will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the item 8.4. Just going to make sure I'm on the right one here. The Reciprocal Fire Services Mutual and Automatic Aid Agreement. And I believe we have the fire chief on the line, so welcome. Chief, are you there? Do we have to unmute Ms. Williams?
Chief Hughes, can you hear us? He is unmuted. He may have left his station temporarily.
Or he may have... Chief Hughes, perhaps he's got an emergency that's come up. Chief Hughes, if you may have your phone muted and not the line, is that possible? I can move on to the next agenda item and come back to it, or I can address this.
He can hear us, we can't hear him. Chief Hughes, you're not muted. You could call in on the conference line. Yeah, the conference line is open. He is calling in.
Okay. So we'll just we'll let him call into the conference line, and we'll deal with that. I'll just remind the public that this is again one of the items on the agenda that is open for public input. So if you wish to speak to this agenda item, the phone number is on the agenda or at the bottom of the viewing screen on the live stream. Worst case scenario, we can always just call him and have the phone on speakerphone as well, if that's. This is part of the joy of technology, that we get to struggle as these things don't connect properly.
Just one moment, I do believe he is coming.
Oh, there you are.
Chief Hughes, if you could turn off your device where you're streaming the meeting, we're getting feedback.
How was that,
Oh,
Selena?
Fabulous, thank you.
yes, thank you, Chief Hughes. Thanks for your patience as we work through other items on the agenda. Not to stop you from talking, but if you can provide a fairly brief overview of the document that's in front of us, then we can get to questions, get to the public, and then move to a motion. Go ahead, Chief Hughes.
Yes, Your Worship. Good evening, Your Worship and members council. I'm pleased to present a new mutual and automatic aid agreement with Victoria and Salish communities for your consideration. This new agreement builds on our previous agreements and adds modern liability language, joint training provisions, professional standards for firefighters and officers, information sharing on high-risk occupancies within the districts, introduces an auto aid framework with Victoria Fire Department, cost recovery provisions for mutual aid if provided and received are unequal, flexibility for backfilling stations for training and other special circumstances, and generally a higher degree of interdepartment cooperation.
Thank you very much, Chief Hughes. Are there questions of the Chief? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Chief Hughes. Chief Hughes, is it fair to say that sort of one of the major components of change between the previous arrangement and this arrangement has to do with the cost recovery piece? I mean, as I understand it, the cost recovery was more informal in the past and is now more itemized. Do I have that right?
Hughes?
Yes, the cost recovery, through the chair, Councillor Appleton, the cost recovery provisions really are to ensure that there is a mechanism for balancing the scales beyond simply the responding into each other's jurisdictions. Our agreements with Salish over the years, due to auto aid, there's a number of circumstances there where we would respond more often to an area like UVic, for instance, yet Salish would respond into our district and perhaps spend more time. But the cost recovery provisions are one of the components. I wouldn't say it's the main component. I think there's a lot of improvements in this agreement to encourage participation and ensuring that our agreements that we make through the chiefs and the Fire Services Committee concentrate on fairness.
Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Yeah, absolutely. Through you, Your Worship. I absolutely understand there's many, it's a fully revised agreement, so it's definitely comprehensively updated. I was just referring to that the historical agreement didn't specifically provide for a monetary recovery, in that it was more service related and didn't specifically say that there was a specific reference made to costs being recovered in the historical agreement, and now it does.
Mr. Chief Hughes?
Sorry, it was a little, through the chair, it was a little difficult to hear you, Councillor Appleton, but I take to mean that you were asking if there were cost recovery provisions in the legacy agreements. The answer would be no to the agreement with Victoria City under the 4 core agreement that used to be in place. There were some provisions in the more recent 2020 Salish agreement, but there was slightly different wording.
Councillor Appleton?
Just one other, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Chief Hughes. Just one other quick question, if I could. There's an estimate of, and very difficult to estimate costs and what the amount of response would be, but I noticed that the report says it provides an estimate of 4 instances of help that might be a cost recovery. Is that sort of based on historical averages, or what is that? What's that based upon?
Yeah, Chief Hughes?
That. Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Appleton. Yes, they're based on historical averages. However, I have, used the highest estimate of both supplying a crew to our district as well as backfilling and not having any provision back to our other partners to balance the scales. So I wanted to make sure that we were able to finance this if it was to be used to the most expensive point that the language allows.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chief. Are there other questions of the Chief? I'll go, just so I make sure. Go ahead, Councillor. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you so much, Chief. It's great to see that that you and the team is taking care of our fire safety. This is very, very, very important. I have 3 questions. One relating to liability and the municipal insurance, the MIABC, Municipal Insurance Association of British Columbia. I see that there's a $15 million figure and a $10 million figure with respect to liabilities and compensation and those sorts of things on I believe, a per incident basis. Will some of these new figures in this agreement in any way affect how much, I may not be using the term correctly, but how much monies we pay into the MIABC per year with respect to being a member of the association and sharing province-wide the liabilities of the organization?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. You're referring to the premiums themselves and those costs?
Yes, well, thank you, the premiums. Will this be affecting our premiums?
Okay, thank you. Chief Hughes?
Through the chair, Councillor Zelka, that is one of the reasons for the wording in the recommendation at the end of the document to adopt it substantially as presented. We have had solicitors go over it as well as been in contact with MIABC. And to the best of my knowledge to this point, there wasn't going to be an increase. However, we will work with those numbers to reduce any cost implications, but we haven't been presented with any up to this point.
Okay, well, thank you. So that sort of touches a bit on the second question. Schedule A is very drafty. I don't see a lot of detail in there with respect to the details of the types of calls and the details of the types of map areas and those sorts of things. I presume there'll be further work done, presumably within the Fire Services Committee to complete a Schedule A. And then I presume after that, we'll see another copy? That was the question.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I'm not sure this will come back to this council automatically. Chief Hughes, if this passes as worded today, what next?
Your Worship, if this was to pass today, those additional maps and sub-agreements would be dealt with through the Fire Committee, which would comprise the fire chiefs of the communities. And I wouldn't expect to bring that back to council, but I'd be happy to on an informational basis at that point.
Okay, thank you.
I thank you. I can presume that at budget time, should there be a budget impact, we could possibly ask questions at that time about any impacts. Is that true?
As the chair, I'll just say yes. That's always in order to ask those kind of questions at budget time.
Okay, excellent. So then that may be an appropriate time to ask follow-up questions on the details as they get fleshed out. My final question has to do with the DMAA, which is referred to as the Disaster Mutual Aid Agreement from 1980. There appears to, while the bulk of this agreement really relates to fire services with respect to those items specifically under the Fire Services Act of the province of BC, the Disaster Mutual Aid Agreement touches a bit on emergency management related to a different act. It seems to. And the reason why I ask specifically about that is that I noticed that at the CRD level, they've got this agreement signed in 2016 related to REMP, the regional CRD level, regional emergency management partnership, which through the CRD includes Oak Bay. One of, in the strategic plan for REMP at the CRD level, it is to rebuild or update the Disaster Mutual Aid Agreement. So the question I have for you is, how does that agreement tie in with this mutual aid aspect for relating to fire?
Chief Hughes?
Through the chair, just for my clarification to Councillor Zelka, are we discussing the 2000 Disaster Mutual Aid Agreement?
Well, that version is referenced in this agreement, but I do note that CRD is in the process of updating it.
Chief Hughes?
Through you, Your Worship, yes, we do have a draft copy in the works right now, Councillor Zelka, and we'll be making sure that those two agreements mesh up with one another.
Thank you. So the last sort of nuance that I'm hoping you can just flesh out for me, is this specific to the fire services aspect of that agreement, or are there any emergency management aspects related to that agreement? Since emergency management is a separate act, even though emergency management and fire services both, if I understand correctly, you actually hold the reins for both of those acts with respect to the powers given.
Sorry, Councillor Zalka, just for my clarification, are you asking whether this agreement touches on both, or is that? Okay.
Yes, I am asking about that.
Okay, so specific to this mutual aid agreement, does it touch on the EMBC as well?
Well, I was confused when I saw that the Disaster Mutual Aid Agreement appears to be incorporated into this mutual aid. So
Okay.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be confused. Is this 99% fire services, 100% fire services, or does it include any emergency management aspects?
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Councillor Zalka. Chief Hughes?
Yeah, through the chair, the Disaster Mutual Aid Agreement would be separate. This would be 99% Fire Service or Fire Services Act, where the Disaster Mutual Aid Agreement is where that could be exercised where we had a task number, for instance, and we could use fire services through that as well.
I'm so glad to hear that, because if there's any way that we can offload some of this liability to the province, I'm with you. Thank you very much. You've satisfied my question.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Is there any other questions? I'm not seeing any, so there's a motion suggested here, but Council's welcome to make a motion as they see fit.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Is there any other discussion? I guess I should have called for public input before I had the motion on the table, but that's my bad procedurally. But we can certainly take comments before we debate the motion. Is there any public that have called in on this item? Ms. Williams?
No callers, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you very much. If you are waiting for the next item, grant opportunities through Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, please call in now then. And we'll come back to this item, which is the motion on the Reciprocal Fire Services Agreement. Is there any other discussion on the motion? I'm not seeing any, so I am ready to call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
In favor, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That passes. And we have item 8.5, grant opportunities to the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. I think fairly straightforward, but Chief Hughes, I'm assuming you're speaking to this as well?
Your Worship, that's correct. We've frequently apply to these grants. I think the memo is and the recommendations are quite clear. Just for a little extra information, we'd be looking at the emergency support services stream at gearing up for some group lodging replacement of materials as well as some storage. And within the emergency operations centers, we'd be looking at improvement to our EOC materials, supplies, replacement, and modernization.
Great, thank you very much for that clarification. Are there any questions of the chief? Not seeing any. Are there any calls, Ms. Williams, on this particular item?
No, Your Worship, no calls.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm come back to this table then. Is somebody willing to make a motion?
Move the staff recommendations, Your Worship.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Seconded, thank you. Any further discussion on this motion? I'm not seeing any. I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Green? Councillor Green, what's your vote?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
And Councillor Zelka?
In favor, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8.6, the 2018 Mayor's Task Force on Public Engagement Report and Recommendation. Ms. Varela, I believe you're just going to do a quick introduction of this.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is really closing the loop on the 2018 report. I think there were 56 recommendations that came out of the report at that time. Staff has operationalized the majority of those reports. Currently, we're looking to include $16,600 for software and implementation of the development tracker that Council has discussed to date. That does exclude staff time in the upcoming 2021 budget. So if Council doesn't provide alternate direction, you'll see that in the first draft financial plan. The table, I think, is self-explanatory. It does provide the staff response, the status of the item, and if there are 2021 budget implications.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Varela. Are there questions? And again, if members of the public wish to speak to this item, this is a chance to do so. You can call into the number that's on the agenda or on the bottom of your screen at this time, and we will put you in a queue and get to your questions or comments in just a few moments. Is there any questions from Council on this report? Councillor Appleton?
Yes, Mayor.
Okay, I have Appleton and Green.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to staff. I very much appreciate the report back on the work of the task force, and it makes for exciting reading. So I appreciate it a lot. I'm just wondering whether or not there is a plan for another report back at a certain, whether or not we need to provide direction, or whether there's already a plan in place to report back again on future implementation or future options around the recommendations made in the report.
Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Your Worship. So if there are
Your microphone's not on. There
sorry.
we go.
Thank you, Your Worship. If there are outstanding items that Council would like to provide additional direction on, staff would welcome those. Right now, staff are working on the public engagement framework, which really is intended to be a transparent and accessible document that provides an overview of why, how, and when the public is involved in civic decision-making. So I think you'll see about a report about that going forward. Certainly a lot of the successes that have been achieved, everything from the web portal that the district just received a shout out from L.A. Rankin on, the kudos extended by Island Health with our COVID information. We'll be doing a shout out in the annual report detailing those successes. But again, if there's any outstanding items that we're not currently indicating action on, we welcome that direction.
Anything else? Okay. There's, I have Councillor Green. Go ahead.
Oh,
and then Councillor
Oh,
Nay.
thank you very much. Some of my question has been answered, but I just wanted, first of all, to say how pleased I am about this particular item. I think this is going to be a great benefit to the community. And I guess my question was, is there an implementation timeline for the development tracker? Now, I think you've referred to this before in previous meetings, but I'm sorry I can't recall the timeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Your Worship. So staff are anticipating bringing that forward in the first draft financial plan. Implementation, I believe, is slotted into Q4. There will be lead-up work to that, but staff are prioritizing a payroll system at the IT level, so that will impact timelines. So I believe we are anticipating Q4.
Thank you, Ms. Rella. Does that answer your question, Councillor Green?
Yes, thank you. So just for the information of the public, that would be the fourth quarter of this year?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Ney?
Well, I don't have any further questions about the recommendation there, but I do just want to comment on this compilation and Appendix A to staff, and I concur with Councillor Appleton. It's amazing how staff has really taken that on and has embraced sort of what engagement means to this community. I did just notice on the crosswalk by the fairways, there was a sign up by the crosswalk and the little push out from the sidewalk to protect people. I don't know if others have saw it. It's a lovely little sign that explains what the function of that piece was, to move the sidewalk out with the piling things there, and then it asked for feedback, what people thought about it, whether it was useful or how it worked. And you're just seeing those kinds of things pop up all over the place, where you're just making these extra efforts to stay connected with the public. So really appreciate the work on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. Any other questions of staff?
Councillor Zelka?
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll be very brief, echoing absolutely all the comments of my council colleagues. Thank you so much for staff for bringing levels of sophistication that allow service to be brought to the point where it's needed, without necessarily increasing long-term costs. Of course, we have to spend a little bit of money to get these systems in place, but once they're in place, then the electronic aspect just sort of takes over. And this development tracker will certainly go a long ways and can be used for a number of different purposes. So thank you so much for bringing this forward. Can I presume that this is a bit like where we basically are authorizing this now to proceed, so that if staff wanted to spend the money sooner instead of later, they once we approve this, they could go ahead? Or do we have to wait for some other budget, master budget, to be approved before this can be actually spent? That was a question for staff.
Sure, through you to staff. I think I can answer that. It has to go to a budgeting process for approval, but Ms. Rella, do you have an answer?
I'll defer to Director Payne, who's on the line, Your Worship. Okay,
thank you. So I will invite our Director of Financial Services, Mr. Payne, to answer that question. And the question, if you didn't hear it clearly, was just to, does this approval essentially go ahead to start implementation, or do we have to approve this as part of the more formal budgeting process? Mr. Payne?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. But this direction would authorize staff to begin, and it would just necessitate the financial plan to reflect that direction. So, so it would provide the option of staff beginning, if able, now. However, it's more of a question about staff capacity at the moment and priorities as opposed to a budget at this point.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Payne. Councillor Zelka?
I'm so happy to hear that, and I'm ready to move the motion as soon as you've heard from the public.
Okay, thank you. There's been no motion made yet, so that's a dangerous thing to say, Councillor Zelka. At this point, I'm going to go to the public. Is there anybody from the public who's called in to speak to this item?
No, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Williams. Come back to this table. I just have one quick question on this, and item number 4 on that list was the consideration of posting minutes, draft minutes, within 72 hours of the meeting. Is that something that's still being sort of chipped away at as a possibility? And if so, what would that look like?
Thank you, Your Worship. Certainly, as a best practice, we are looking at turning minutes around in their draft form in 48 hours. Right now, we have a technical component to
allowing us to publish those that we're working through. So we're hoping we'll have an answer for you on that within the next few weeks.
Okay, but it is actually being actively worked on.
Yes, it is.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ms. Williams. Any other questions?
I'd be very pleased to move the motion if you'd let me.
Sure, absolutely, Councillor Zelka. Feel free to.
Council, I'd like to move staff recommendations as detailed in the report.
Sounds good. And seconded by
For the
Councillor Appleton.
memorandum to be received and for that staff allocate the monies to proceed in the 2021 budget.
Great. As that's moved and seconded, you are not required to motivate, but you are welcome to do so if you wish, Councillor Zelka.
I think I've motivated enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wish to speak to the motion? Not hearing any.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead, Councillor Green.
Sorry, it's very difficult on the phone.
It is.
Sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to say that this piece, the whole public engagement piece, has been, as you know, near and dear to my heart. And I have to say, I'm really wanting to commend staff on the number of initiatives they have completed, that they've implemented. It's been amazing. And in this past year, it has been particularly critical because we don't have a lot of contact right now with our community, and we don't have the ability of having the public attend meetings and so on. So I just want to commend them on the efforts they've made, and I agree with my other colleagues that they may seem in the giant scheme of things small things, but together they make a huge impact. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. And I would just extend my appreciation to staff, not just for the implementation of these recommendations, but the lens through which things are looked at to try and improve how we communicate and how we receive information every day in the municipality. And this is a portion of that, but it's nice to see it in a report form like this, that you actually get a chance to sit back and appreciate it. So with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
In favor, thank you.
Any opposed? None opposed. That passes. Thank you very much. We're moving on to item number 9.1. This section of bylaws and permits is not subject to public input. We are actually, first item on the agenda is bylaw 3531.105. And is Ms. Jensen here to introduce this? So this is the item that was in front of us as a public hearing last week or 2 weeks ago.
Thank you, Your Worship. As Council may recall, this is a district-owned residential property at 1538 Monterey Avenue, where the Victoria Immigrant and Refugee Center Society is proposing to use the Monterey home for a mix of refugees, which could include couples, individuals, single parents, up to a maximum of 8 people in the home, as well as providing for an on-site caretaker. So as per the content with the lease agreement, the district initiated the rezoning process by bringing forward a report at the November 16th Committee of the Whole meeting. Since that time, the bylaws have received first and second readings, and a public hearing was held on January 14th. So the bylaw in question would not change the zoning of the property, which is currently zoned RS5 for one family residential use. What it would do is introduce a site-specific use into the RS5 zone for this property only that would allow for that congregate housing use, permitting up to 8 persons and 2 domestic staff. So at this time, Council could consider the bylaw for third reading and adoption. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I would just welcome debate on this prior to any motion. Then we'll, if Council wills it, we can take a motion for third reading or other motion is deemed appropriate. So is there any discussion on this item? I'm not seeing any. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. I think that I'm surprised that there's no discussion so far, but I do have some comments that I would like to say. And I think that my feeling is that there's going to be a lot of support around this table and in the community for the zoning amendment and for the Welcome House project in general. As the owner of this property and the proponent for the change in the zoning bylaw, we are actually in a bit of a conflict of interest and so need to be cautious on how we handle this. Using a sports analogy, some might say that we're the player and the umpire at the same time, but that's something we do have the authority to do. I hear loudly the concerns of the BIA, business owners, and some residents as to the worry that if this rezoning is approved, that this property will never be included in the village plan, as how would we be able to end the lease that has been signed? I want to make sure that our residents know that all parties were aware in advance and before any work was done on these properties that the lease on this and the Hampshire House property are to end in July 2023, and at that time the expectation is that the properties will be included in our village plan, whatever that may be. We have a long-standing commitment and made promises to not only our residents, but also our businesses that we would use properties that became available to the municipality around the village for the expansion of the village. And so they have a reasonable expectation that council will stand by those promises. The municipality has been taking money from the businesses and putting it into a fund to do just that, expand the village, using the land we purchased to enhance green space, making places for people to sit and enjoy a coffee, bike parking, perhaps electric vehicle charging, and yes, perhaps even some vehicle parking. This is what the Monterey property and the Hampshire Road property will eventually be used for. As it will be a new council in July 2023 when the lease comes to completion, we need to leave things in good, clear terms so it's not untenable for that new council to have to deal with. To that end, I'm going to be making a suggestion to council to move up the village plan item in our council strategies so that it is ready for the new council to implement when the lease is up on these properties in July 2023. And I hope my colleagues will support that. With that understanding and knowing we as the governing body can change the zoning back if and when we need to, and assuming that using this space as congregate housing is not breaking any rules during the pandemic or not following specifications that Dr. Bonnie Henry has set out, I'm assuming that would fall to Verks to ensure that all rules, etc., would be followed. So up until then, I believe that it's a good thing to rezone this property until our village plan is ready to go. So when time comes, I'll be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Is there any other comments around the table before we get to the motion? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I want to extend my thanks. We had, as everybody is aware, we had a very imperfect and undesirable public hearing. Staff worked overtime to try and make it as good as it could be, but obviously it's not the ideal circumstance for a public hearing where the public is so restricted in being able to participate, or not in the way that they classically would have. I just wanted to make mention and that I was very gratified to hear, mostly through correspondence from all the members of the community that were so eager to welcome these new neighbors into our community, and just the really broad-ranging support about what this immigrant welcoming facility could bring to the community. So I was very, very gratified by that. And just picking up on Councillor Braithwaite's comments, I would also concur that for many different reasons, I would like to see us move as quickly as feasible on the village planning process, just because I know that it's going to have so many positive outcomes for the district. So I definitely concur with that comment.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Any other comments?
Councillor Zelka?
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to just acknowledge the incredible number of volunteers who got us to the place where we're now considering this for a medium-term refugee congregate housing situation. The number of fundraisers throughout Oak Bay to raise funds not only for Syrian refugees but for refugees in general, and the number of families that opened their doors, and the churches, and now in this case Oak Bay opening up the spaces that were available to make the world frankly a better place. I also want to acknowledge the previous council and the previous mayor for the initiatives that they brought forward to initiate this project. And that I want to congratulate this council, assuming we pass this, for seeing it through. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I don't see any other hands wishing to speak to it.
It's Councillor Green.
Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you very much. And I also will be supporting the motion. I appreciate the comments by Councillor Braithwaite as well, and by Councillor Appleton and Councillor Zelka. I think it's important that these properties have the highest and best use at the moment, given that we have no specific village plan yet under, fleshed out. But I also agree that it's important that we plan ahead with our partners, which include organizations and, of course, the BIAs. So I think it's important to be clear about long-term plans, and I think this at the moment is a good way to utilize the properties, both of them. But I do think we have to be clear and very forthright about the fact that we are looking at a village plan that will include those two properties at some point in time, and that the lease arrangement currently is good until 2023, and at that time, then I think it's important. Hopefully, the village plan. I agree that if we can expedite it, that would be very desirable at this time, and include these properties in that planning function. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I don't see any other comments. I'm aware of the time. We just want to, but I'm happy if there's no further comments to take the motion. Should be a third reading. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will move that zoning amendment bylaw 2020 number 3531-.105 be given third reading.
Is there a seconder for third reading? We've seconded. Thank you. We've already had our discussion on this, so I don't see any other comments. I will call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
In favor, yes.
All right, that passes, and I need a motion to adopt.
I'll move adoption.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Second.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
Yes, thank you.
I saw hands up all around for in favor, but any opposed? None opposed. That passes. So that amendment is complete. We have we're going to need to make a motion to extend this meeting by, say, 15 minutes.
I'll move a motion to extend the meeting till 10:15.
Moved and seconded.
Second.
Thank you. I need unanimous for this to be supported, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
Yes, is it 10:15? Is that what I heard?
10:15, correct. So we're moving on to item 10.1, which is the Heritage Commission Establishment Bylaw. This is open to the public input. And so this is if anybody wishes to call in on this item, you're welcome to do so. The number again is on the agenda and on the streaming screen. Perhaps we've had this will be for first, second, and third reading. I think we'll take first and second reading and then have a discussion as the typical approach we take for these kind of bylaws.
I'll move first and second reading of bylaw 4770.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. So that motion is now live on the table and we can have a discussion. Is there any comments that people wish to make? This has been in front of committee of the whole, obviously.
I would like to. Oh.
Please go ahead, Councillor Green.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you to staff with their patience and their willingness to consider our amendments, to have a workshop specifically to address concerns. And I think this is a good document now, and I'm very grateful to them for that support. And I think this will make the Heritage Commission a valuable ongoing advising body. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Any other comments or discussion? I will open this up for the public. Are there any members of the public who have called in to wish to speak to this item?
No callers, Your Worship.
Okay, so we have first and second reading on the table live in front of us. Is there any other discussion? I'm not seeing any, so I'm prepared to call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
In favor.
Thank you. And we can get mover of third reading.
Move third reading of bylaw 4770.
Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Thank you. I don't usually have discussion after immediately following second, so we'll just call the question on third reading. All those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
In favor, thank you.
Thank you, and this will come back at a future council for adoption. Under new business, I have none. Is there any other new business being raised tonight? Seeing none, I will just need a motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment.
Moved and seconded. All those
Second.
those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Councillor Zelka?
That would be fine, yes.
Thank you. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much for the little bit of extra time tacked on there to complete that. And we will see you all on Thursday and again on Monday. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, good night.
Aren't those lovely?
Participant exiting.
It's Corrine Green.